Colin. Thank you, Betsy. Dear speakers and participants from all over the world, we are honored to welcome you to the public-private dialogue on promoting consumer protection in the dispute resolution and redress mechanisms in e-commerce. This project is organized by the National Institute for the Defense of Free Competition and the Protection of Intellectual Property in the COPI, the Peruvian agency responsible of promoting a well-functioning market and protecting consumers' rights. The objective of this dialogue is to provide an overview and discussion of some of the main current barriers and challenges to overcome in order to foster consumers' confidence on e-commerce and exchange experiences on the regulatory framework in this area among APEC economies. Abelardo Aramayo, Project Overseer, will give us the opening remarks and welcome to this event. Mr. Aramayo serves as Technical Secretary of the Commission on Unfair Competition of the National Institute for the Defense of Free Competition and the Protection of Intellectual Property in the COPI. He is a lawyer graduated from Pontifical Catholic University of Peru with concluded master's studies on intellectual property and competition law at Pontifical Catholic University of Peru Graduate School. He is a member of the Administrative Tribunal for Settlement of Claims from Users of OCIPTEL, professor, writer, and speaker at national and international conferences on commercial law, competition law, and intellectual property. Please welcome.
Thank you, Andrea. Dear colleagues from the Asia Pacific, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. On behalf of the National Institute for the Defense of Free Competition and the Protection of Intellectual Property in the COPI from Peru, I would like to express our warm welcome to all of you from different parts of the world for your active participation to this public-private dialogue on promoting consumer protection in the dispute resolution and redress mechanisms in e-commerce. We are happy to have received nominations from 18 APEC member and non-member economies, such as Vietnam, China, Mexico, Singapore, Chinese Taipei, Chile, Korea, Russia, United States, and many others. Also, we are glad to have over 75 participants who have signed up for this event, which shows the strong interest in the topic. The digital economy is changing the world, radically transforming many economic sectors and the way how goods and services are offered in the market. In this sense, digital economy has enabled the massification of e-commerce, increasing the number of consumers' complaints. At the same time, especially given the pandemic caused by COVID-19, consumers sometimes lack the ability to properly complain or find a solution, leading to a decrease of confidence in e-commerce. For these reasons, it is very important to find solutions for consumers and suppliers to disputes generated in the digital context. In this sense, this event constitutes an important effort of Peru through INDECOPI between APEC in order to promote consumers' confidence in electronic commerce and the digital economy. The public dialogue on promoting consumers' protection in the dispute resolution and redress mechanisms in e-commerce seeks to open the debate of the appropriate mechanisms for dispute resolution in e-commerce and on the importance of improving consumer confidence through new policies, self-regulatory mechanisms, and global best practices. We are sure this will increase the capacity of public officials and private sector representatives involved in consumer protection to deal with this topic. In this regard, Peru's initiative has as its main objective the development of a set of voluntary recommendations to promote best practices in consumer dispute resolution in e-commerce. I hope this effort will contribute with APEC economies regulatory authorities, self-regulation organizations, online dispute resolution organizations, and the industry to focus on promoting appropriate mechanisms for dispute resolution in e-commerce, given the importance of building and improving consumer confidence in electronic commerce through new policies, self-regulatory mechanisms, and global best practices. Before we start with the sessions, I would like to express my thanks to all the outstanding speakers for their commitment and willingness to share with us their knowledge and experiences. We will be part of a very enriching experience. Also, my thanks to all the participants who are enthusiastic to join us during this three-day event. I would like to remind you that at the last session, Thursday in the Asian region and Wednesday for the Americas, we will have a workshop discussion with breakout sessions that will lead to the drafting of voluntary recommendations to promote best practices in consumer dispute resolution in e-commerce. All participants are invited to share their experiences and recommendations. I hope that this joint effort from the public and private sector will be useful to APEC economies and contribute to keep addressing the objectives of the APEC priorities regarding digital society and integration. Thanks for your attention and enjoy the event.
Thank you, Mr. Amayo, for your motivating words. Before starting with the first presentation, I would like to invite you to turn on your cameras to take a picture. One, two, three. Thank you. To start with day one of this public-private dialogue, we will have our keynote speaker, Pablo Cortés, with a presentation framing the ODR landscape, lessons learned from the European Union. Pablo is a member of the Spanish Bar. He is recognized widely as a leading expert in dispute resolution. He currently is a professor at the University of Leicester Law School and serves as a fellow at the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution. Welcome, Pablo.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. I'm going to share my PowerPoint, which I hope you can see now. So it is a pleasure to join here, and it's an honor for me to deliver this keynote. As already mentioned, I'll be talking about the European model, the EU Consumer ODR platform, which has been operational for the last 5 years. And over the next few minutes, I'll first discuss briefly the rationale behind the European legal framework, its main legal provisions, and then the experience and the lessons learned about the EU ODR platform over its first 5 years of operation. So regarding the rationale, as already has been mentioned in the introduction, there is a clear consensus that having effective redress increases consumer trust in the market. Specifically, having effective and fair ODR services will be particularly suited to promote e-commerce and cross-border trade. And this was sort of the initial findings of the European Commission, and this is not unique. Of course, the UN, UNCITRAL, and the Organization of American States, and many other organizations like APEC have acknowledged this. And the Commission, back in 2010, the European Commission, which is sort of the executive body of the European Union, investigated why traders would not sell in other European member states, and found that 60% of them refused to do so. And they said that amongst other reasons was because there were concerns about their ability to resolve disputes in other European countries. The Commission then surveyed the availability and the provision of ADR across the European Union, and they made three main findings that were later reflected in the legislation. The first one was that the provision of ADR and ODR services across the European Union was quite patchy. So in some member states, in some countries, they have ADR bodies, in others they didn't have any. And in those member states where they have ADR was often only available in specific sectors, like for utilities, often in regulated sectors, but not for regular retail, for instance. The second main finding was that when these ADR bodies were available, their quality varied significantly from country to country. So in some places was easily accessible, free of cost for the consumer. In others, it wasn't the case. Sometimes, or it's often these services were provided by the regulator itself, or even by the trader or the business. So they were not properly independent. And the third main finding was the lack of awareness. Even though most consumers and traders say that they would prefer to resolve disputes outside the courts than in the courts, only 3% of the consumers surveyed back in 2011 said that they had used ADR when they have an unresolved dispute with the trader, with the business. And the percentage was 9% for traders. So these findings, the Commission said that were sufficient to justify legislative action. And that led to the drafting of a directive and a regulation. I had the privilege to work for the Commission as a consultant because I was invited to participate in a restrictive tender. So I was advising the Commission in the initial stages of the drafting of the proposals. So the European legal framework has the double aim of increasing consumer access to justice. And here you see that for access to justice encompasses also ADR, so it's not just access to a court process. And in particular, they were interested to promote cross-border trade in the European Union. And they wanted to do so by building on the existing infrastructure of ADR and ODR bodies already operating in the European Union. And the tricky part is that there is a great variety of processes. I'm sure there will be the same, if not more, across the APEC. So for instance, to give you a flavor, I published a book back in 2016, edited a book with other people where we look at how consumer ODR operates in 9 different European countries, as well as the US. And this huge variety, for instance, in Spain and Portugal, the main consumer ADR bodies are publicly funded arbitration schemes, which are free of cost for businesses and for consumers. In the UK, the predominant process are ombudsman schemes and adjudication, which typically issues decisions that are not binding on the consumer, but is binding on the business. In Northern Europe, they have complaint boards. So there is a great variety of processes. So what the directive does, the ADR directive, is sets an obligation to all European countries to ensure they have available ADR processes for virtually all types of consumer issues. So that ensures the full coverage across the European Union. And this obligation is imposed to the governments of the European countries, now affecting all the European economic area, so 30 different countries. The second main element of the ADR directive is that they want to ensure a minimum quality assurance amongst all ADR and ODR providers. And they do so by requiring the governments to create or to use competent authorities, which are basically public bodies, typically the regulator of the sector, to certify ADR bodies that meet these minimum criteria. So they must be independent, impartial, have expertise, comply with the principles of fairness, efficiency, transparency, legality, liberty, and these are fleshed out in more detailed rules. So for instance, the process must be free of cost for the consumer or be offered at a nominal cost. Complaints must be resolved in a maximum of 90 days. If the consumer is offered a settlement, he must have the ability to request time to reflect and seek maybe legal advice before accepting a resolution. So you see these are fleshed out in more detailed rules. And the final pillar of the directive is awareness, and that is requiring businesses, European businesses, to inform if they are linked or adhere to an ADR process. And every time they have an unresolved dispute with a consumer, and this has been controversial, the business will have to inform the consumer about a certified ADR body and clarify whether the business will use it. Because it is not mandated, the participation in the ADR process according to the European law, but the domestic law, the national law, can make it mandatory. And in fact, that is the case for typically complaints against utility companies, water, electricity, gas, financial services. So there are a number of sectors where it can be mandatory, but according to the national law. Also, a final element of awareness is that businesses are required to, those businesses that operate online, they are required to have a link to the European ODR platform. And this is the main purpose of the second legislative instrument, the ODR regulation, which basically imposes an obligation to the European Commission to set up the platform, which allows consumers to complain, to submit claims on e-commerce matters against traders operating in the EU, and allow them to choose one of these ADR bodies that have been certified by a national competent authority, a national public body. And then the ADR body can resolve the dispute via the ODR platform or using its own software. And then you have the link to the ODR platform. So what happened to this ODR platform? Has been operated as anticipated. Well, it's been operational since 15th of February 2016, so just over 5 years. It has received so far over 111,000 claims, which is not a very high number if you think there are nearly 500 million consumers living in the European Union. But it has received a higher number of visits, over 2.8 million visitors per year, according to the Commission. Currently, 55% of the complaints are domestic and national disputes, and 45% are cross-border. It used to be 5 years ago when we started was 65% domestic. So increasingly, the number of cross-border issues are growing. So and currently, there is over 400 certified ADR and ODR bodies accessible via the ODR, European ODR platform. But what happened to these complaints? Well, the majority of them are not referred to one of these bodies. In fact, only 2% of them go to them. The rest, well, 85% were automatically closed, the complaint, in the European platform because the trader, the business, did not reply. And that's because the business does not have an obligation to reply to the complaint. For the 9%, the complaint was refused by the trader, and another for the 4% was withdrawn by either party. Interestingly, the Commission dig in what happened to these complaints and contacted the parties, a significant number of them, and found that nearly 40% of cases, parties were able to resolve the dispute by settling the matter outside the platform. So the Commission concludes that the platform is doing something positive because it's leading to a significant number of resolutions. However, the platform, unlike the Brazilian consumidor.gov, did not offer the possibility of negotiating in the platform. And that's one of the changes that happened recently. And that led to some changes that were implemented at the end of last year, which in effect, one of the most significant changes was the creation of a parallel platform that they call it the self-test tool that allows the consumer to explain the problem and is provided with 3 options: to either send the draft claim to the trader. If you do it through this self-test tool, you can also negotiate with the trader without having the time limit of 30 days that are set in the platform. It also informs consumers about the possibility to contact a European Consumer Center who can advise them on cross-border disputes, or directly an APEC entity when the complaint is on an issue that the trader is required to participate in the process. As I mentioned earlier, typically utilities or financial disputes, traders are required by law to participate in the APEC process. In addition, also, it has set up an interactive website where the most common complaints, which are airline disputes against airlines, and late deliveries, they'll provide you some commoditized, automated information based on the information provided by the consumer. The consumer is getting some basic legal advice. Now, the platform also allows, the EU Odr platform allows for the direct negotiation between the parties. And importantly, traders can now register in advance in the Odr platform, which has 2 important benefits. First, the consumer is able to identify the correct details of the trader. And secondly, the complaint itself, it avoids from the complaint to arrive to the spam folder of the trader, which apparently was quite a common problem. Because remember, the platform, it can be used to send complaints against any business in the European Union without necessarily the prior agreement of the business. The Commission said that they plans to develop new features, and it will issue a call for tender in the near future without specifying which features this will be. So have the aims and goals been realized? Well, it has been an increase of access to justice. Well, it has been for a small number of cases, arguably. Has it promoted trade? Well, there's another big question mark there. Clearly, consumers do not choose traders in the European Union based on whether they are linked to an Odr system or not. So Odr is not a direct influence of promoting trade, one could argue. But regarding the goals, it's possible to say that these have been largely achieved. So now I think the main achievement is that now in the European Union, there is traders, businesses, and consumers, if they want to resolve the dispute, they will find publicly certified APEC bodies across the European Union. So there is currently full coverage. However, participation is optional in many sectors, especially in non-regulated sectors, in retail, in e-commerce. Regarding the second goal of providing a minimum quality standards, these are currently monitored by competent authorities, and also via reporting requirements that these certified APEC bodies have to do every year. So there is more transparency, and there is certainly minimum standards that are being met insofar as, well, they are monitored, and they can obviously lose the accreditation if you don't follow these standards. And then the awareness has been increased, but not obviously not as much as it was hoped for. Initially, when the Odr platform started operating, I think it was only 28% of businesses provided the link to the European platform. Now it seems the percentage is around 50%. But remember, participation remains voluntary, and also this link is not always easily accessible because often businesses include it in its terms and conditions. They borrow it in the terms and conditions, so are not easily to find. So I don't want to use all the time because I want to leave some time for questions, but I wanted to make some suggestions of what I think it could improve the current system. I think in order to increase trust in the market, I think this will be properly achieved if consumers really choose traders, businesses, based on whether or not they are adhered to Odr. And a way to do so, at least in the European context where you have a certification system, will be by using a trust mark or an online label that makes it easier for consumers to identify whether the business is linked to an Odr body or not. Of course, the trust mark is not a silver bullet, but clearly, if you have competent authorities that are monitoring Odr bodies, and the Odr bodies are in turn, have businesses and traders linked to them, I think the trust mark system could work quite well. I think also there is a need to clarify and to harmonize when mandatory participation is required for traders across the European Union, at least to some degree. And this information should also be more easily available in the platform, which currently it is not at all. Then I would suggest, I would certainly like more the Brazilian model, which is being very effective in reaching settlements and promoting negotiation. And that is because it's an opt-in model, unlike the European model. So I would suggest that traders should opt in to use the Odr platform, and those who opt in to use it, then they should provide a link that must be easily accessible, ideally in the customer service section of the website. Traders should upload their details on the platform in advance, making it much easier for consumers to make complaints, and obviously reply within the 30 days deadline, which is currently not happening for most cases. If the platform remains as currently is available for all traders and consumers, then I believe that consumers should be able to identify traders whether they are adhered to an Odr body or not in advance, and also be offered information about non-Odr options like chargebacks. Because otherwise we have the system, the current system where consumers go to the Odr platform, but they don't get resolution in many cases. So just some concluding remarks, some of which obviously I have written about. This is, you can see there a copy of my book, which I published in 2018. So, I mean, it is obvious that effective redress will increase consumer trust in commerce, especially Odr will increase trust in commerce. But in order to have a proper functioning cross-border Odr system, you need to have, first of all, a working national Odr system. I think it is possible, as the European Commission, the European model has shown, to have common standard for different type of Odr and Odr processes. So there is not a need to be fixed on a single process. But having a single gateway or Odr platform obviously will facilitate the journey for the consumer. And that journey should start, as the Brazilian model has shown, with a negotiation, which obviously is the most cost effective, and this is what businesses want in first instance. And the European Commission has relinquished and incorporated this feature. But also it's crucial to ensure engagement especially from the trader, the respondent. And I suggested the trust mark as a way to achieve it. Grath and Capelletti spoke over 40 years ago about different ways of access to justice. They talk about class action, legal aid. Well, class action is not really taking off, certainly not in Europe for many consumer cases. Legal aid is dwindling for civil cases, let alone consumers cases, and it's being used mostly for criminal matters. And ADR was a third wave of access to justice. And certainly ADR is increasingly used more and more for dealing with consumer issues. Arguably, the use of technology, audio, could be a new wave of access to justice, making this making it more accessible. But bear in mind that in the European Union, these ODR and ADR bodies are often specialized, they are publicly certified, and they're also expected to cooperate with the industry and regulators and enforcement bodies. So, they are non-for-profit organizations, so they have a specific model that it may differ from other jurisdictions. But anyways, I think this is just an overview about the European model. And if you have any questions or comments you wish to make, I'll be more than happy.
Thank you so much, Pablo. This was great. Maybe we can have quite a small round of applause for Pablo. If we were there in person, you'd hear the roar of the crowd.
Thank you.
That was excellent. I can't think of anyone better, literally, on the planet to kick off this conference than you, because you are the person who have done the most thinking and writing and research about this. Let me just put a few of the comments that were posted in the chat to you. I know it's late. Thank you so much for staying up, so we don't want to make you stay up all night. But there were a couple questions around the fact that it's a voluntary program and how to improve participation rates, and how it's impressive that participation got to 50%. But the question is, has there been any analysis of what businesses are participating? Are they the good businesses that are advertising ODR to their customers who don't really need it? Or is it, as you said, it's very focused on like airline disputes? Are the airlines more likely or less likely to inform their consumers about it? So has there been any research on that question?
I haven't seen, in general, I think it's fair to say that usually businesses who are required by their national laws to participate to an ADR process, then those businesses they tend to engage in the dispute resolution process. They often try to do it outside the platform. They often want to do it, via direct negotiation with the consumer. They don't, referring the complaint to an ADR body, they see that as a last resort option. So to give you a sense, in the UK, it is mandatory for businesses to participate in an ADR scheme for financial issues, electricity, gas, water, estate agents. So a higher, third level of education. So in these sectors, which are highly regulated, usually business participate. And that's why I thought that having a trust mark or providing a proper incentive for the business to participate, it is crucial to make it work.
And I see a note that Profeco has just launched its own trust mark. So they say, I think Rafael was saying it's a great presentation, very much in line with what they're working on. There was another question about mass claims. When COVID hits and many flights are canceled all at once, it's interesting that this design seems to require each individual consumer to file a case. Has there been any discussion about how those mass claims could be brought into the system?
Not that I'm aware of. Certainly, I also work as part-time as an adjudicator, online adjudicator, dealing with airline complaints against us, also with other telecommunications and water disputes. And airlines, they certainly prefer to deal with cases on an individual basis. I understand that it may not be cost efficient to do so, but what they want is obviously to discourage complainants when possible. and they insist to do it on an individual basis. I know for in the past, for financial disputes, for instance, there have been cases where the financial ombudsman has taken a test case to the courts and put many similar cases on hold and waited for the outcome of that judgment in order to apply the same interpretation to other cases. So that's the only example I'm aware of. I think in general, it's fair to say that most ADR schemes and most businesses will oppose to offer collective redress.
Sure. I will say if these programs, and this is a note maybe for later in our series, if these programs create an incentive for companies to resolve disputes directly with consumers because they want to avoid them, that's not necessarily a bad thing. So the last question I'll ask, and then I'm going to let you go to bed. Have there been any estimates around cost savings? Has there been any estimates around alleviated litigation? And are there any legal issues around requiring consumers to be notified of a mechanism like this, when in fact there may be attorneys that are interested in representing them in a formal lawsuit? Has there been any discussion around that in the EU program?
The only thing I'm aware of is that when the proposed legislation was published, the European Commission published an impact business case study where they said that it could lead to us having a well-functioning audio system. It would lead to a saving of at least 0.2% of the GDP of the European Union, which was quite a significant amount. Can't remember the number of millions, but a significant amount. What was the other part of the question?
Well, I think it just had to do with, are there any issues from lawyers who feel like this may be taking cases out of the courts that they're interested in?
Oh, no. Lawyers usually, these are by and large, consumer disputes are of low value. There are cases that don't end up in court, by and large. There are cases where even if they end up in court, they end up in the small claims where parties don't have legal representation. So lawyers, they have not opposed to this new trend. They have been more opposition maybe with the court digitalization trend than with the ADR and the digitalization of ADR as such, as far as I'm aware.
Got it. All right. Well, once again, Pablo, thank you so much for setting us off on such a strong foot at the beginning of our journey. You made wonderful contributions. Now it's time for you to go to bed, and I'll send you this recording, and you can send us more of your thoughts tomorrow. But again, a round of applause for Pablo. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Colin, for your kind words. It's been a pleasure.
Excellent. And I see there are some questions, Shrikara, that you asked, but I'm going to let you address those during your presentation time in Q&A. So Pablo, thank you very much. Feel free to log off at any point. Okay. And Andrea, maybe I can hand it back to you to take us to the next component.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you very much, Pablo, for your presentation. Now we will begin 2 sessions with an outstanding moderator and panelists. Our moderator for this day will be Betsy Brother. Betsy is a career consumer protection and privacy attorney. She served in numerous leadership positions at the U.S. Federal Trade Commission during her over 30-year tenure. She is a leading voice and innovator on many consumer protection issues, including dispute resolution, cyber fraud, privacy, and data security. Betsy represented the FTC during the Untitled Odr project and led FTC initiatives on cross-border fraud, identity theft, and data sharing. She has testified before the US Congress and has been featured in many news sources, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, the PBS NewsHour, and CSPAN. Let's start with our session number 1 titled Cross-Border Consumer Protection in the New Digital Markets. Please, let's welcome our excellent panelists for this session. First, Juliana Oliveira Dominguez, National Secretary for Consumer Protection, Brazil, and former Director of the Department of Consumer Protection from the Ministry of Justice. She also teaches at the University of Sao Paulo and earned a fellowship as visiting scholar at Georgetown University, USA. She has vast experience with consumer law, compliance, data protection, and fashion law, and has been honored with numerous awards. We also have Luciano Paredes, Manager of Corporate Affairs in the Foreign Trade Society of Peru, where he coordinates the engagement of Peruvian business leaders in different business councils, such as the APEC Business Advisory Council, Peruvian Chilean Business Council, and the Pacific Alliance Business Council. He is a specialist on international affairs with over 10 years of professional experience promoting the relations of Peruvian enterprises in the Asia-Pacific region. And finally, we have Filiberto Ibañez Juarez, General Director of Complaints and Conciliation of Mexico's Federal Consumer Protection Agency. He has over 23 years of experience in the Federal Public Service in Mexico. He was the Director of Legislative Analysis, the Director of Legal Studies and Regulations, as well as the Coordinator of Advisors and Chief of Staff to the Secretary in the Secretariat of Welfare Bienestar. Let's start our first session.
And thank you, Andrea, for setting out the background of our esteemed panelists for this discussion, the first session in our three-day program. Now that we've heard from Abelardo Aramayo from Indocopi and Pablo Cortes from Leicester University, we're ready to dive in to discuss the nuts and bolts of ODR and how we, who represent many economies that thrive on strong consumer protection, can promote ODR systems that enable fair, accessible, secure platforms for dispute resolution in business to consumer transactions. As Senor Aramayo explained, promoting effective ODR has never been more important. In the midst of COVID-related shutdowns, I think most of us have relied increasingly on online purchases for goods and services. Some of these have involved purchases from distant, increasingly foreign vendors. So what happens when a dispute arises? Unlike our dispute with one of our local and friendly merchants who don't want to risk reputational loss and losing a valued neighborhood customer, how do we deal with disputes when there's no face-to-face contact? Or how can we resolve a dispute with our local vendor in a simplified and accessible way? And are these systems easy to use, especially for vulnerable consumers or those with little access to financial systems or with limited literacy? Fortunately, we have some of the leading thinkers and ODR managers today who are going to guide us as we explore these issues. And while our speakers come from various perspectives, technology, academia, public authorities, and others, the common focus is on ensuring that ODR systems are built on the fundamentals of consumer protection. Put another way, our discussions over the next 3 days will address how to be sure that consumer protection elements of fairness, access, and security are baked into ODR systems within our respective remits. And from that, we hope to develop a series of best practices, voluntary best practices that lay out those frameworks. So today's first panel is going to address existing ODR systems in Brazil, Mexico, and Peru. Then we're going to take a short break, and the second panel will address the emergence of new systems and cutting-edge issues as they relate to ODR innovations, including how they manage cross-border trade. You've already heard from Andrea about the impressive background of our panelists for the first session on cross-border consumer protection in the new digital markets. So our first panel is going to describe their ODR systems in their economies, how they were established, how they function now. And then I'll pose some questions to them. We'll do questions through the chat as Colin described. And I encourage you all to think about questions. Maybe some of the questions that came up during Pablo's remarks will trigger additional questions for these three esteemed speakers. And with that, Juliana, I think there's a lot of pressure on you now to come forward after Pablo applauded the efforts of Consumidor.gov's BR and the experience in Brazil. So I welcome you to give your presentation. I'd like to let our participants know that Juliana has a very busy schedule and has some conflicts. So she will be with us to give her presentation. She has a colleague who will carry forward and answer any questions that may come up. So thank you so much, Juliana, and let's hear from you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Betsy. Sorry about it. I'm always doing, I think everybody, but thank you so much for this. I don't know if you were seeing my presentation. Okay, thank you so much. So, yes, I think Pablo did a very good job. And as you mentioned here, I am National Consumer Secretary in Brazil, but I am also a professor of competition and economic regulation at the University of São Paulo. So I'm very honored to be here discussing with you the new challenges that we have. I know that talking about cross-border consumer protection in the digital market put on everybody a lot of pressure due to the coronavirus pandemic. And I think it is a very important topic due to the challenges raised by coronavirus for consumer protection, especially in an increasingly digital economy. I did something wrong here. I don't know why. Let me see if you can see. Okay, can you see now the second? Okay, I think now is okay, right? Perfect. Okay. Are you watching the presentation? Is that okay or not?
I think you're showing us thumbnails of your slides rather than the full page. You had the full page and then it reverted, Juliana, to the thumbnails.
Okay, let me see here.
I'm not sure if we lost Juliana. Juliana, well, we will give her a minute to log back on. Colin, can you tell if we've lost her?
Let me see. I do not see her in our list. So yes, I think we lost the connection. So another possibility would be to move on to another presenter and then
She
return
lost
to her.
the connection, but she's just coming in. She already told me here.
Okay, Enrique, thank you. Thank you.
I'm going to put the presentation here for her. I think it's easier.
Great. Thank you, Enrique.
No problem.
I think all of our presenters are going to want an Enrique moving forward. So I can't guarantee that. Only Juliana gets an Enrique.
So Enrique, you said you're going to share your screen and do the presentation from your screen with Juliana. Okay, thank you.
Well, I will just say in the interim, because time is valuable, Srikara, I really did appreciate the questions that you asked to Pablo at the end of his session. So I just wanted to surface that and maybe hear just a moment from you until Juliana returns, about costs. Who bears the costs of running and building the system? I'd be curious to hear what you're interested in learning a little more about the EU system in that regard about.
Yeah, sure, Colin. I think the reason I'm asking this question is that considering ODR is coming up in India, I think one of the biggest questions is this: do consumers bear the cost of, providers providing redress services, or should it be the providers who bear the cost, considering they save a considerable amount by not going to court, which in India is a pretty expensive deal. I think this question is still in the wing. So I was just wondering if the EU already has some experiences with this that we might benefit from. And I think in particular, we're also worried if providers kind of pass on the cost to consumers, although they're not supposed to, and if there were any perverse practices on that end. Yeah.
definitely.
And can I address that? Because I think that's something that comes up a lot. And particularly, as Pablo said, many of the disputes are low value disputes. So this is not a situation where a consumer is willing to invest a lot of money into resolving this, but they want their justice. And so one of the principles I think many of us will arrive at is that there should be minimal or no cost to the consumers. I think that was one of the EU principles that was contained in their directive, that it not be a burden. So in fact, this is something that is born maybe by the industry, but I think we also talked about there could be public-private partnerships. Colin, do you have something to?
Yeah, I was just going to say we need to revisit this definitely on day 3. I think this is a huge topic. This is the debate that Pablo and I have had many times together, and even in the Untitled ODR working group, we had a large discussion about should the financial burden for these programs be carried by the public sector or the private sector. At eBay, what we found is consumers, they wanted to engage in a transaction and they're dissatisfied. So if you charge them anything more, $1 more, $5 more, they're doubly frustrated because they don't feel like it's their fault that they're in this situation. So I do think it's very important that the consumers be provided essentially a free way to get redress for any problems that they encounter. But the question is, do you take 1 penny off of every transaction and put it in a fund and then pay for all of the ODR mechanisms out of that fund? Or do you have, like they have, as Pablo mentioned in the UK, every time that a case is filed against a business, the business is automatically charged a certain amount of money, and that fund essentially funds the cost of the ODR mechanism. So I think, Shrikar, you've asked a really crucial question, and on day 3, when we come back to the working groups, we might want to specifically address this in one of the working groups to think about cost, because cost is connected to sustainability, and it's also very much connected to consumer satisfaction.
So at this point, Enrique, what do you think we should do? Is Juliana able to rejoin us?
I don't see her on.
Would you like to do the presentation as the co-pilot?
I'm sorry, I think she's trying to get in, but she said that the password is not working. That's why she didn't get in. So now that's the problem.
Interesting.
At what time does she have to leave the event? I'm wondering if maybe we ask Luciano to do his presentation now. And
I think she would need to leave just right after she finished the presentation. So I don't know how long it will take to get that problem fixed. I'm not sure what is the problem actually. So
Enrique, I put the link into the chat if you have a way to communicate that to her via email or WhatsApp. The password hasn't changed. Actually, in that link, it's embedded into the link. So
perfect.
Hopefully she'll have more success with that. I'm sorry about this. I've been in this situation where I get disconnected and then I get very panicky. So everyone understands that this happens sometimes with these online fora. So if you can reassure her on our behalf, please do so.
And the other thing I would add is that we can't, on our coffee breaks or whatever, when we take our break, we would normally sidle up to the person who asked a question and then continue the conversation. So I hope people are being aware of the others who are asking questions that interest them, and that after this event, you're able to network and grow and learn from each other. Juliana is back with us, connecting to audio. Juliana, you're on, and Enrique has your slides up, so.
I'm so sorry.
No, this happens.
It's not working, my computer anymore. He's not responding to me. Okay, so Henrique, you can put the first slide, okay? I think that in Brazil, consumer protection is very unique, especially because our country is very huge with regional and economic differences. And only on September 11 last year, we celebrated Brazil the 30th anniversary of our Consumer Defense Code. And we are always fighting to build better policies, especially taking into account vulnerable consumers as the elders, low-income citizens, and people with disabilities. And today I'm talking a little bit more, as Pablo helped me a lot, about our consumidor.gov.br, which we consider an outstanding best practice of public ODR for consumer disputes. And it was created in 2014. And it is a public alternative consumer dispute resolution platform that allows direct dialogue between consumers and companies to solve conflicts over the internet. So you can see the slide. So let's talk about the main characteristics of our ODR. It is a public ODR platform. It means free to consumers and very transparent to society. It consists on self-composition. So indeed, the service major innovation is to allow direct communication among consumers and providers without direct governmental intervention, only monitoring. We also are very worried here in Brazil with accessibility. It means access by consumers with disabilities, and we are always trying to update the facilities, not only on its website, but also considering the mobile versions that we have. Consumidor.gov.br is a public policy tool that provides also for us essential information to the government to develop and to implement consumer public policies. So as I can share to you all, our platform basically is focusing on trust building, permanent dialogue, consumer empowerment, information, transparency, and effectiveness in results, which are essential policy principles for digital public policies. In a few words, the consumer, in fact, must register the complaint that the company needs to answer, and after the consumer evaluates it, in the end, we have all these actors having interactions, and considering the time frame, the problems must be solved or correctly answered in less than 10 days. You can see now the slide 3, but let's talk a little bit more about the main change concerning the functioning of the platform. In this slide that Henrique is showing now, you can see the numbers of our platform, right? But I think we can go ahead. I'm so sorry that we had these technological problems. And then I can talk a little bit the main changes concerning the beginning of 2019. And they are at least 4. Integration into the judicial process. We have now a participation seal. It means a certificate of participation for the companies. Our platform became the official federal self-composition digital platform for consumers. And the number of complaints and participants have risen dramatically, as you can see. And the solution is still around 8% of the demands. Besides, the demands are solved in less than 7 days. So Henrique, you can put the slide 4, please. So initially of our platform, companies were free to choose if they want to register in the consumidor.gov.br platform or not. So before 2020, despite the great benefits generated by the platform, there was no obligation for companies to be a part of the program. However, as the pandemic hit, Senacom saw the need to make the platform mandatory for certain types of companies through the Ordinance 15 from 2020. As in-person complaints became impossible and call centers had to be closed due to social distancing measures, there was a need for consumers to find a reliable outlet to solve issues that did not involve lawsuits from the start. So as you can see, Senacom drafted an ordinance making it mandatory for companies that fall into certain categories. Henrique, I think is the other slide. Companies that provide public services or essential activities in accordance with one federal decree related to coronavirus in 2020. We have this, just making sure what are the public services and essential activities. We also have the digital platforms that provides transportation and delivery services because everybody is using it. Also the marketplaces and companies that were among the 200 most complained international data platform, composed by more than 600 PROCONs. PROCONs is the fiscalization units from the federal states and cities that take care on the issues and application of the consumer code. Also, to avoid burdening their system as well, creating unnecessary obligations for smaller companies, the ordinance was specifically directed to companies or economic groups that had a gross revenue of at least 100 million reais in the last fiscal year, and had reached a monthly average of at least 1,000 complaints or more, or were responded in more than 500 consumer lawsuits. In this regard, our focus was to deal with companies that had demonstrated recurrent consumer problems at a large scale, essential services that greatly impact consumer welfare, and digital service that saw a boost in sales last year. To measure was highly successful, as even with the phenomenal expansion of the companies and the record numbers of complaints, and we still have around 8% of demands solved. So it is a very good policy, and we are still trying to maximize it. In fact, recently, Senacom published another ordinance, the number 12 from 2021, that reinforced most of these criteria established last year, but essential public services providers, but also internet platforms, and we also have now social media that is also working as marketplaces that need to be at the platform. So another point of attention from Senacom was the fact that in several cases, social media providers work similarly to marketplaces, as they function as a communication tool to consumers and suppliers. And they are not accounted for it in last ordinance. As such, digital platforms commercialize advertisement, providers connection, application, content services, as well as they have profits. They were included in this new ordinance. So during this pandemic, I think it is essential that we make the best of technological issues and create safe and efficient policies to promote consumer welfare. If companies do not comply with the ordinance, and due to the coronavirus pandemic that is still very strong here in Brazil, Senacom is prepared to open investigations. In fact, we have recently notified 30 companies due to their lack of compliance with the compulsory registration. And we need the participation of the providers and suppliers to guarantee the effectiveness of the platform and to respond to consumer needs. Besides the alternative resolution methods and platforms and this specific ODR that we have in Brazil, we have been promoting studies and analysis to reveal the update customer service support that we call here in Brazil SAC. We discuss a new index proposal to measure the problem solutions and to design efficient channels to mitigate the lack of information and communication. Of course, this is considering that both consumers and companies are with good faith, and both consumidor.gov.br and the new proposal under discussion, they are focused to modernize consumer service regulation, and specifically considering the digital updates that we need and the inclusion of consumers with disabilities. We are also developing policies based on best international guidelines, and we must think about the inclusion of millions of consumers with vulnerabilities here in Brazil as they face additional difficulties, especially with electronic commerce and devices. By the way, I'm proud to inform that last month we entered into the first agreement with our new Brazilian Data Protection Authority, and this is a fundamental step to address incidents involving consumer data. And we think it is very strategic. So we must create here in Brazil, especially considering all the difference that we have, tools, and not forget accessibility methods and tools that can guarantee data protection from consumers. And we are trying to develop these modern standards, incorporating the best international practice and considering our differences in a country that is so huge, almost a continent. And I'm always saying that it's time to create British, so not walls. So we like to have this conversation with you. I'm so sorry about my problems here with my technology devices, but thank you for this incredible opportunity to share our experience, and I hope to add to this important discussion.
So thank you, Juliana. That was wonderful, and I understand that you have to leave us. So I wondered if I can take the privilege of being the moderator here to ask you one question, and that is, do you have just one more moment?
I think that Henrique can just take the presentation. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. So
I am already late, but Brazilians, they are always late.
But you must go.
Thank you,
Thank you
Juliana.
so much for your time. That was really exceptional. And we all know what it's like to have the technology fail on us. So I think we will turn now to Luciano Paradis, who is the manager, as we know, of corporate affairs in Peru's Foreign Trade Society. So let's just jump right into it. Luciano, if you could share your slides and proceed.
Totally. Thank you, Betsy. Let me just put this up. 1 second, please. There it is. Yep, perfect. Okay, so thank you, Betsy and Colin, for the invite, and thank you to the friends of Indecopy for putting this gathering together. I think it will be very interesting to understand from the different experiences in the APEC region and others during these 3 days. And thank you as well to the friends of Mincetur, who I see they are connected, and to everyone who has joined us today. Just a quick disclaimer: I'm not a lawyer, so I'm basically I'm the manager of corporate affairs in the Foreign Trade Society of Peru. We are a business association who gathers together around 70% of Peru's international trade. We mainly gather medium and large enterprises, importers, and also companies that provide services to trade. And as part of our organizational duties, we sit at the APEC Business Advisory Council and other business councils, trying to deal with public policy from the private perspective, and trying to doing this exchange of best practices that we're doing today. So I'll brief agenda for my presentation. I promise I will be brief. So I just wanted to take you one step back on ODRs first, and to understand why these mechanisms are important, why cross-border e-commerce is becoming a thing nowadays, and why it is important not only for consumers, but also for MSMEs, which are basically the backbone of our economies. So dealing with ODRs, implementing ODRs, making the transactions more predictable, friendly, transparent, actually have a huge impact not only on consumers, but also in our labor force and small companies as well. Later, I will have a couple of slides on Recalama Virtual, which is the Peruvian ODR experience. And later, we will talk about business-led mechanisms, which are not properly ODRs, but can actually be a smart solution or a way around the problem. So the first point, basically, we have to understand that there has not been time in history before that has been more favorable for small business owners in the world. In the story of modern economics, actually, globalization, the widespread of internet, the digital economy, the fourth industrial revolution, all these things have come together to make this the best moment to be a small business owner, and of course, a business owner of any class as well. Why is it? Basically, because of three main things. And this is something our friends in Google shared with us in a presentation quite a time ago. And basically, this is first because of the information. Information is everywhere. Actually, you can have any information using a mobile phone. And you have the information literally at the reach of your hands. This was not possible 10, 20 years ago with the starting age of the internet. Now it's widespread and you can have any information you want at the reach of your hands. You can have suppliers, you have payment terms, information about legislation or requirements, customer requirements, anything you want or you can think of, you can have it through the internet. Then we have the low costs associated to trade, and also other things that are related to businesses. For example, the computational power. We have seen that automation, computer processing capacity, even shipping cost, not lately because we are in the middle of a shipping pricing crisis, but has been more accessible through the last decade to business owners all around the world, making it a great time to do business with the world. And also access. Well, this is basically the same, the other side of the same coin. With internet, you have access to a lot of things, a global customer base, and basically you are connected with the world. And with these trends, actually what has happened is that a lot of digital platforms has been put in place, and they actually bring a lot of value into the equation. In one side, they lower the cost a lot. We are not talking about participating on trade fairs anymore. This is more like a luxury to medium or big enterprises. So they go to Shanghai or Hong Kong and participate in business fairs, and they offer their products. But what the MSMEs do is they actually put together a website or a site on a marketplace, and they start offering their products immediately to a huge amount of customers around the world. Then they also improve transparency in the equations, and therefore they make the transactions, especially in cross-border e-commerce, way more efficient. You know how much it will cost. You will know it soon. You will know it, and you can track it. So there's a lot of transparency that is put in the table. Then you have, of course, a global access to suppliers, and you get to understand what the global demands are. And of course, MSMEs, some of them are very agile to adapt. It's not a surprise that a lot of MSMEs, for example, in the COVID pandemic, in the midst of the COVID pandemic, they started, if they had a textile company, they started producing some sort of masks for the local or even the regional markets. And also the digital platforms integrate and value-added services. And this is something we will talk later on when we talk about the business solutions. So e-commerce is becoming a big thing. It's a huge thing. Now, it's no surprise that China actually drives cross-border growth in the world. They are becoming, well, not only nationally, it's crazy how e-commerce work inside China, but also it's becoming a big thing, and it's now a big thing in cross-border transactions. China is selling and increasing their share in global cross-border e-commerce rapidly, especially to United States, Canada, Australia. It's a little bit lacking behind in terms of their transactions to the European Union, but overall, they have roughly $1.5 trillion a year in B2C transactions of cross-border e-commerce, which is huge, and it only becomes and is coming bigger and bigger. So why it is important? Basically, because according to the WTO, manufacturing MSMEs export directly around 10% of their total sales and roughly 9% of their as indirect exports. When we talk about developing economies, and this is something that could also have to do with knowledge of international markets, literacy on internet, capacity building, etc. This rate goes down to 7.5%. But overall, if we only see the developed world, the sales of MSMEs represent 34% of total exports. So what we can see is that MSMEs are engaging more into international trade, but this will also lead to a set of challenges that we have to address and put in place the right mechanisms to address. Not everything is great for MSMEs. This is some data that our friends at the Hong Kong APEC Trade Policy Group shared with us in the APEC Business Advisory Council. There are roughly 820 million cross-border e-commerce disputes. This was in 2016. We can imagine this number has increased significantly now in 2020, especially in this COVID era. 1 in 20 cross-border contracts end in a dispute, which means there is a lot of problems around international trade. And a single dispute on average involves 6 companies, not only the companies involved in the transaction, but then you have to hire a service, a mediator, etc., etc. What this represents in terms of cost and time? Well, basically what the average dispute is around $53,000 US. So we're talking about very significant amounts. Of course, this is an average. When we talk about MSMEs, it goes down. The average time to settle is 15 months, which is crazy for a time to settle a dispute, especially if these are significant in terms of financial or monetary resources. The cost of a US lawyer can be $1,000 per hour. We can imagine following the traditional process of dispute settlement with using these resources can be in fact very pricey. And of course, as a result, 1/3 of the disputes that are started, we're talking about roughly 300 million a year, are never resolved. So this is a little bit of the landscape or the snapshot on how is global e-commerce doing, why is it important for MSMEs. Let's go to the ODR experience locally. So basically in Peru, our friends of Indecopy put together this very interesting tool that is named Reclama Virtual, which was launched back in October 2019. This was a perfect timing for COVID, actually. They had a few months to test and make the adjustments and to have this put together during the pandemic. It's a tool that is available 24/7 through any electronic device, and it's specific for complaints that has to do with e-commerce transactions. This is important because in a country where 85% of the people access to the internet through a mobile device, not through a laptop or a computer, having this option to access this kind of ODR through any electronic device actually have a lot of value. This system leverage on Indecopy's citizen service platform, or Servicio de Atención al Ciudadano, which is the name in Spanish, and solve the complaint through their mediation or conciliation mechanisms that are in place and that used to work offline and now are working online a lot. the ODR uses a simplified online form, which has been very, very useful for consumers, and it has promoted the participation and engagement of consumers into the platform, because usually when you associate putting a complaint, then you face that you will have to complete some extensive and complicated forms. But now they have put together this very smart solution with a simplified form that actually is engaging and it's friendly for the user. And they have put the citizen at the center of the solution, which is very nice. In the platform, you can also access other information. You can track the status of your complaints. You can have information, other sources of dispute resolution. You can see some other tools of in the copy, such as the consumer map, etc. And this has been a very good experience because it has been created in partnership with the e-Government National Secretariat, which is an office at the center of the Prime Minister office, and which actually oversees all the e-government solutions throughout the nation and the central government. And I think that as this process started and they envisioned it, they were able to put together a very interesting solution for the people. So how does it work? Briefly, you register your complaint at the website. You fill the simplified form. In the copy, contacts you as consumer at the earliest convenience. You assign your complaint number and then a dedicated case officer, which are very experienced. And I think this has to do a lot with the success of the platform. And then in one working day, actually, the copy is already contacting the supplier and starting the mediation or the conciliation process, which can be finished and fully solved through the online platform. One thing, or a very positive thing that the people in the copy mentioned to me that they saw during this experience of becoming virtual or coming online, is that when they used to do this physically, there was an important rate of no-show of companies that didn't show to the conciliation. But now that it's virtual, it's easy, and that rate is becoming significantly lower. So this is just, excuse the Spanish, but this is just a small chart on how this Reclama Virtual compares to other existing dispute resolution mechanisms. As you can see, it's the fastest available. It's free. And it has the support of Indecopy, which is a very sound and with a good reputation government agency, which I think it's the full equation that gives success to this formula. Actually, as we can see in the chart here, they are moving already around I would say 15 to 20,000 cases a month. These are the numbers since the creation of the system in October 2019. And well, not all of these are actually complaints. Some of them result into orientation or information services as well. But we can see there's a lot of people and it's getting a lot of traction. And I'm pretty sure the numbers of 2021 will be even higher and better. So that was the Peruvian ODR, but also I wanted to share with you that when we talk about dispute settlements businesses, we can have also a very active role and not only giving or putting the burden into government agencies or policymakers. So actually, when we see the expectations or the risks in cross-border e-commerce, so we see that logistics, delivery, compliance with local regulations are very important for businesses and consumers, but also offering exchange and returns is part of the top three, let's say, pain points in cross-border e-commerce. And what is identified as a game changer for cross-border e-commerce were basically in this document from Accenture, and this was an international survey. that they put together or they conducted in 2017, they identified that online marketplaces will continue to dominate and also become a solution to streamline and facilitate cross-border e-commerce. And here's one of the examples I wanted to share with you. And this is a Chinese platform named dhk.com. They sit actually at the APEC Business Advisory Council as well. And basically they were envisioned as an all-in-one solution for global e-commerce. They now have more than 2 million sellers globally. They have over 22 million products listed in the platform. A transaction is done every 1.3 seconds. So, and they have actually partnerships with a lot of shipping companies and major companies in the world. This is important because actually they went one step ahead of traditional e-commerce platforms or marketplaces, and they built a lot of solutions around trust and safety. So basically, in dhk.com or in this platform, what you can have is that they actually verify the identity and keep a close tracking of the business history, and they are verified automatically and manually by the huge team they have behind. The behavior and the complaints and the data is monitored and updated 24/7. They have very strict policies for transactions, and the sellers usually have to compensate buyers when they don't honor business policy. They have a lot of tracking and identification and banning of accounts that are not fulfilling the conditions. There's a lot of quality control around. Customer information is encrypted, and there's a lot of other added value services, such as escrow services, where the customer actually pays DHgate, and DHgate keeps the money until the products are delivered and verified by the customer, and they dare release the payment. This, of course, can have some implications when we talk about long-term transactions in terms of cash or liquidity, but it's a very interesting solution that enhances trust in the system and engage a lot of customers globally. And actually, my key message here is that companies, we can play a key role for this. We can create effective mechanisms that build trust in the system, that enhance compliance and lower the incidence of existing disputes. We have seen that they are a lot. They are reaching 1 billion probably already a year. We can ease the burden on policymakers and consumer defense agencies that already do a great job, such as my friends in the copy. We can facilitate information that to make these dispute resolutions faster and more effective. And we can offer also enhanced services for cross-border e-commerce transactions, such as the escrow service that I mentioned a while ago, but also payment solutions and other things. I think that the important thing here is that businesses do have to think out of the box. Solutions are becoming more accessible, more streamlined, more available, and we do have to start to think that if we want to engage MSMEs into the global e-commerce, or if we want to bring or give that added value to customers, we have to start thinking to participate and engage more actively into these solutions that are business-led. And of course, the ODR existing mechanisms that are available in our economies. That would be from my end, Betsy.
Luciano, that was great. This is why we're describing this event as a dialogue, a public-private dialogue, because there is so much value to be given from either side and understanding perspectives to make the value proposition for businesses something that will benefit both consumers and the consumer protection agencies. That's really what we're striving for. So 2019, Peru began its ODR platform. 5 years ago in Brazil, they launched consumidor.gov, but Mexico perhaps, is maybe one of the more senior players in the ODR system. And so we're really grateful to have Maestro Filiberto, who is the Director General of Complaints and Conciliation from Mexico's Profeco, with his colleague Rafael. And they're going to be describing ConciliaNet, which is an ODR platform that's been in use for well over 10 years. And drawing on that information, they'll be addressing a lot of the same issues, but maybe with a little more maturity of their platform and lessons learned. So Filiberto, Rafael, I give the floor to the two of you.
Thank you very much, Betsy and Colin. Thanks for the invitation in the name of Profeco. I apologize in advance if my English is not very well. In the case, I need the help of my colleague Rafael, but I'll do my best efforts. As you said, ConciliaNet is the ODR platform in Mexico that was launched in 2008. 4 years after the federal protection law was introduced, the possibility to file claims electronically. And of course, it has give Profeco a lot of experience and learnings, why not say that, limitations to satisfy consumer complaints. As I said, ConciliaNet born in that year with 2 traders. Now we have 95 traders that represent about the top 10 traders in ConciliaNet represent about 30%, and last year 34% of the total claims received in Profeco. Pandemic raised and pushed this file complaining 10 points just in ConciliaNet. On the other side, the percentual complaints dropped around 42%. The 38 offices Profeco had all along Mexico, and this has shown us that we have to do some new efforts to assure our consumers that their rights are protected reasonable and fast and the best way possible. Maybe I'll tell you some other, share you some other numbers. In general, ConciliaNet had this increase, but it has shown us in the last 4 years some increasing the rate in the terms of complaints in relation to the total complaints in Profeco. For example, in 2017, ConciliaNet represented 5.7% of all the complaints received by Profeco. In 2018, this number raised to 6.8%. In 2019 to 7.4%. And of course, the jump, the giant leap was between 19 and 20, when it increased from 7.4 to 70%, 10 points in just 1 year. So what have we done? Well, just as the other cases presented before, the Peruvian ODR and Brazil, ConciliaNet is a public platform sustained by federal budget, exclusively by Profeco's budget. It has an area specifically determined to attend this platform, and the traders participate in the platform by signing an agreement with Profeco. It's a voluntary participation, but as in Mexico, the consumer rights is established in the Constitution. It's considered as a human right. So authorities have, as a human right, the obligation to protect it and to promote it. And that is why this is an administrative procedure, not a judicial, and has no links with judicial branch that implies the participation of one figure, a mediator, a conciliator, to assure that consumer rights are respected and the conciliation gets to a fair agreement. Concilianet, as I said, has these formalities in Mexico as other procedures in our legal system. It's a very rigid legal system. It's full of laws and regulations. And the concilianet, or the conciliation, is no exception as other administrative procedures in Mexico. But it allows consumers to get a resolution in a faster way than in a presence form of claims. Just to give you a reference, while in presence claim, you can take in terms of time, it's an average of 120 natural days. Concilianet, in its best time, around pre-pandemic operation, it lasted 34 natural days. Then it raised to 47, but pandemic really hit us in the time solution. It increased to 77 natural days. I mean, in just one year, Concilianet raised its time to resolution in 30 days. That's a lot. That's a lot, but no matter what, it still is a faster way to resolve a claim. Profeco also has a telephonic conciliation service, Concil Express, that doesn't have these rigid procedures or rules that has Concilianet. It also helps us to solve complaints in a faster way. This mechanism tries to solve the case, the dispute, in around no more than 2 weeks. And we also have an increase of around 70% from 1 year pre-pandemic to the other, to 2020. And by this mechanism, with this mechanism, we solve around 10,000 complaints, almost 11,000. Well, it was another option for the consumer that his complaint would be solved in a faster way. Concilianet, as I said, once it's a totally free and public platform. Consumer registers, just on the Peru experience. Once registered, he can file the claim. The conciliators realize an analysis of the claim, and if it's correct, they open a file, they open the file and the procedure, and they inform that to the trader. Then you have to attend a first hearing for that allows the Mexican law. And in this hearing, the trader has to show, and not only to show, but also to inform Profeco to respond. about the potentials of the demands of the consumer, and if the trader doesn't show, doesn't give the inform or the even a summarize of the inform, Profeco can fine the trader. This ensures that our procedure doesn't stop and can advance to the conciliation and to hear propositions about or from the trader. If you get to an agreement, also the Mexican law says this agreement is like it's like a sentence. It's like an agreement with the rule of law, and it can be executed in the judicial instances of the courts. So they have to be they are mandatory. They have to be satisfied totally. If you don't get an agreement, then Profeco invites the two parties to get to the arbitration, which is voluntary, it's not mandatory. And if they don't, or one of the parties don't want to go to arbitration, then the file is closed, and then they can go to the judicial instance, for example. So what is the improvements we are doing in ConciliaNet? With these numbers, with increasing of the electronic complaints due to pandemic and the rise of the electronic trade in Mexico, we are promoting two improvements. One of it is called reconciliation, which is a new facility at the same platform. It's an online chat, which allows the trader to know the complaint and to propose a solution to the consumer before the procedure initiates formally. I mean, once you get the procedure, you have to continue it, as I said, with all these regulatory formalities, with all these times, with a maximum of 4 hearings. But reconciliation is a new mechanism. We launched it this year as a pilot program to see if we can get a faster agreement between traders and consumers. We do not have yet empiric results. We don't have some numbers. It's an effort to mentally to get traders and consumers in this new way of conciliation. But it pretends to be faster. It pretends to be even the same in terms of equally justice. I mean, the trader has to respect the consumer rights. This doesn't mean as it is a facility in the same platform, even if the conciliator does not interact with both parties, trader and consumer, we do check if the agreement, if it is settled, it is according to law, to Mexican law. But if the proposition or if it doesn't get an agreement between trader and consumer, then we are free to continue with the formal procedure. Continue with the 4 hearings and all the characteristics I said before. The second figure is the, I don't know if I'm going to say it correctly in English, is the like a collective complaint. We call it here in Mexico queja grupal. which is in the Mexican law, or never had been used in ConciliaNet, even in the normal procedures here in central offices in Profeco. It wasn't a figure that was used too much. Also, with the pandemic, we saw an increase, 800%. We passed from 2 collective complaints to 19, mainly because of complaints associated with electronic commerce, e-commerce. And in ConciliaNet, we decided to apply this figure because in terms of scale and in terms of time and resources that are involved in the procedures, we are convinced we can give the consumers a better answer and a more a faster way to solve their complaints. Just to give you some numbers, the history of ConciliaNet, we filed the first collective complaint in last January with 255 consumers against a retailer. Profeco acted as a representative, as a common representative, due to a recent legal reform of November of last year, in which one of our areas in the same Profeco, the class action, acciones colectivas, class action area, can act as a representative, not a representative. One of the limitations we saw in groupal complaints or collective complaints is the challenge to organize between consumers and to assign one or more common representatives. And that challenge was solved by giving one of these area Profeco the possibility to represent consumers even in our own procedures. So this area, acciones colectivas, represent 255 consumers. The file was initiated in January and was resolved last week with a 95% of the cases resolved of these 255. We have just a 30-day period to assure that the trader satisfies all the demands that were assumed in Profeco, and we are in a way to our second collective complaint. We just to give you some numbers of references, if we have individually attended these 255 claims, it would have taken us 1,020 hearings in about 5 or 6 months in the best horizon, probably more. And we just took the legal standard to solve a procedure, which is around 90 natural days, with all of them with the compensation established by law, and we just use the collective complaint was in charge of just one conciliator instead of our fully the conciliators of all the area we have to use if we had to file the claims individually, these 255. So we are using this mechanism from now on. The second collective complaint is against an airliner. Maybe we're next with the electricity supplier and with all the top 10 providers in ConciliaNet, which represent around 86% of all the files of all the complaints in ConciliaNet. These top 10 providers, traders represent this number. So even the traders agree that this mechanism allows to solve and to solve the complaints in a faster way. It is a challenge to analyze because you have to be sure that there's an identity between the trader, the complaint, the cost, and the pretensions. But once you solve this, then the procedures goes on very well. Well, that's what we wanted to share with you, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. I know that we are running a little bit over, but the richness of this dialogue and the information and the creativity is real. I mean, I think it's fascinating that in Mexico, this collective action addresses one of the questions that came up to Pablo, which is what do you do with common issues? So I have a couple of questions. I know that Colin has some as well. And I think what we'll do, if it's all right with everyone, we're kind of going over time, but I don't want to interfere with anybody's questions, is we'll take a few questions and talk a little bit more. Then we'll take a short break, get a cup of coffee, get a cup of tea, depending on which side of the international date line you're on. And then we'll move to the second session. So my question, I was fascinated, as were some other people, that privacy will become one of the topics that can be considered in Brazil for an appropriate topic. So expanding on that, I wondered what happens in matters where the remedy is not one of monetary relief. That is, the consumer hasn't necessarily lost money, but there's conduct. And that is the cause of the problem. Or maybe there's monetary harm and conduct that you want to stop. So maybe if we can start with Enrique and explain what kind of remedies can be ordered in Brazil under consumidor.gov and whether they extend beyond monetary remedies. And then either Filiberto or Luciano, if you want to contribute after we hear from Enrique, that would be helpful.
Thank you, Betsy. Actually, consumidor.gov is a special kind of platform. So you actually get direct contact with the supplier. So we don't meddle with the types of complaints or the types of with redress at the moment, or any type of I don't know. It's the consumer and the supplier. They can actually get into an agreement by themselves. But that's the point that I think is most important. The data we have the data. So we know if there was an actual response, we know what the response was, if the consumer was satisfied or not with that. And with that, we gather the data and we can actually initiate or open an investigation from Senacon to actually sanction. So that's the point. The monetary redress, so we can actually also do it. But if the consumer is not satisfied, or if it's a problem that goes beyond monetary redress, we can still actually do something about it. We can address it as we have the competencies to open investigations and then sanction them.
Very good. Luciano or Filiberto, do you have anything further on that issue of non-monetary remedies in the context of the ODR platforms?
Not really. I think Enrique covered it very well. But actually, something I would add is that in the specific case of data protection, for example, there's a local authority for that. For example, if there's a mistreatment of personal data that is part of the complaint, then this goes through a different authority. So maybe one of the challenges in this non-monetary remedies for complaints, when it has to do with something like for personal data, for example, or something different, is how do we connect the existing government agencies that are in charge of the different parts of the equation so they can work together and we don't duplicate the efforts to come to a solution. So I think this is a challenge moving forward.
And I think that's the outcome that most people would expect, which is if you see a trend in complaints that indicates a larger problem, that is the appropriate role in the remit of Senecon, Profeco, U.S. Federal Trade Commission, Indecopi. So that's wonderful. There was a very interesting question that came up in the chat about how the mediator or arbitrator, that is the one who's making the decisions, is selected. What qualifications does that person have within the context? So maybe this is not person to person, as Enrique was describing, but the more formal processes of arbitration or mediation. Who does that and how are they qualified?
So in the case of Reclama, which I think it's a question about, my understanding is that this comes from a pool of mediators or people in charge of conciliation that are part and work for Indecopi, are recruited and trained by Indecopi. And I think that's, again, one of the great challenges and the great work they do, because they are experienced and actually they are a key factor to the result or to the outcome of the process. So in this case, it's Indecopi who is in charge of assigning this mediator or the people in charge of the conciliator. I just wanted to maybe clarify that there's no arbitration in the process. The only two mechanisms that Reclama uses is conciliation or mediation.
Great. Colin, I'm going to toss it over to you.
Sure, and I know we want to go to break. There's so many great questions that have arisen in my mind as a result of these presentations. Thank you so much. One of the things that's amazing to me is the degree to which volume jumped in all three platforms as a result of the pandemic. I know in Brazil, Enrique, it was because the process became mandatory, but also, Filiberto, to see the ConciliaNet jumped 10% in 1 year, even after ConciliaNet has been around for 10 years, I think that's amazing. And to imagine the strain that puts on your organization, that's a very difficult thing to think about. Now, I think the Consumidor process, because it's using technology to facilitate a conversation, it can more easily deal with that kind of jump in volume. But the ConciliaNet process seems to me to still be a very manual process. So that, again, that must be enormous constraints put on the organization. And to see such a large percentage of Profeco's total claim volume going in to ConciliaNet, I think is very interesting, because I'm not sure it's ever going to go back now that consumers know about these mechanisms. But I did want to surface, before we go to the break, Srikara's point about data. I think that data is the key element here, because you can learn so much from these incoming cases. And I was impressed at how much all three platforms are learning from the incoming flow. So are there systems in place to identify key areas, new areas potentially of pain points, and then to engage in proactive efforts into those segments to try and tackle these issues? Or is it, are we still learning this data, this tidal wave of data has come in and we've not yet been able to make sense of it? So I was curious if the speakers could address that quickly.
In the case of Reclama, as it's a very novel system, I would say we need a little bit more data to do that specific analysis. But I do agree this is a huge opportunity, not only for understanding the characteristics or the key features of the complaints that are entering into the system, but also understanding if there are like surrounding flaws around the e-commerce ecosystem. For example, if there are, let's say, a lot of logistics problems, are we talking about that maybe are the post offices that are not working properly? And this can also lead to, let's say, additional policy recommendations or areas that can be nurtured from this analysis, and that can also impact positively to the ecosystem.
Well, in the case of Brazil, yes, we actually really use this data. We already had a different system that was the national data system that comes from Procons, right? So we use that a lot to understand what is the problem, what are sectors that are most complained about, what are the most common types of complaints. And now with consumidor.gov, we also have another platform to help us do that. So we can actually see how the trend goes from month to month, from year to year. How much has it grown? How much has it decreased? And we actually take a lot of, we do a lot of public policy based on these numbers, right? So for instance, with the pandemic, we saw a very big problem with custom service, especially with civil aviation, because people needed to schedule their tickets and they couldn't. So we saw, for instance, a huge increase in demand and complaints in the consumidor.gov and Sinbec, which is the other national platform, at the same time. So there was I think there was like 200% increase. And we actually know that, so we started talking with airline companies and understanding what are you doing to help prevent this problem. We can see that this is going on.
Great, thank you. Filiberto, do you want to say anything before we go to break?
In Mexico, we have from one year to another, a 35% increase in e-commerce complaints. And that's why Profeco is promoting two new figures, the trust mark that you recently mentioned and the code of ethics. And we want to be sure that consumer has all the certainty that when he buys on the internet, the trader has accomplished all the legal standards to e-commerce. So we hope these two new mechanisms allow us to give the consumer more certainty he buys on the web. We also have an institutional system that allows us to show the main complaint causes, and we are tracking these causes. We are having regular meetings with the traders and the top 10 around at least one meeting every 3 months with the top 10 traders, so they can get from us the information of these causes of complaints, and they can take actions more like in a preventive way than a resolutory way. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. The panel has been wonderful. The questions keep coming in. And I have to tell you, the questions sometimes are going to really help us as we're developing best practices, because they indicate areas where we need to have some serious thought and conversation about how best to proceed. And so the input, even if we're not able to respond to your precise question, these are invaluable comments and observations. So we thank you so much. Andrea, I'm looking to you. It's now 4 minutes past the hour. Shall we reconvene at 15 minutes past the hour with session 2?
Okay.
Okay, except in India, where we're 30 minutes on the other side. So let's take a short comfort break. It's for 10 minutes, and then we will begin with session 2 in 10 minutes. So thank you all, and see you back then.
See you in 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope people are taking advantage of the break to chat with some of the other experts online and make connections there, because again, this is one of the invaluable benefits of events like this, that even if we can't share a meal or a cup of coffee together, you can meet each other. And I'm just loving all of the comments about, how do you do the wonderful work that you're doing in Peru? And what can we do in Indonesia to help promote a system like this? So this is, should be the beginning of many, many dialogues going forward, both formal and informal. So in just a minute or so, we will resume. Vivi, I love your background.
It's funny, although it's a virtual background, if I do look out the window, that's what I see. So
Okay, are we ready to resume? Andrea, maybe you can kick us off.
Yes, thank you, Colin. Well, after our first session, we will be moving to our session number 2, and we will be discussing challenges on dispute resolution and redress mechanisms for consumers in cross-border digital trade. Betsy will keep moderating this session. Let's get to know our panelists for this discussion. First, Ban Yu In, Executive Director of the Singapore Mediation Center. He spearheaded the development of the world's first integrated dispute resolution center, Maxwell Chambers, which brought together arbitral institutions, service providers, and legal practitioners under the same roof in a facility equipped by bespoke dispute resolution rooms and state-of-the-art supporting technology. Also, Vivi Tan, PhD student at Melbourne Law School. Vivi's research crosses consumer protection law, contract law, and dispute resolution system and design, including alternative and online dispute resolution. Her thesis explores the integration of information and communication technologies into judicial and extrajudicial dispute resolution processes, and their implications for dispute resolution, regulation, and practice, as well as for consumer protection law. And finally, Srikarap Prasad, policy analyst with Davra's Research Future of Finance Initiative. He completed his undergraduate in the Law and Arts with Honors course from Symbiosis Law School, Pune. He has interned with the United Nations Development Program.
And again, Andrea, thank you for keeping us on course, even though we're running late. But as we all agreed, that the conversation is just so wonderful. So we've heard about the existing systems in Peru, Mexico, and Brazil. And as we know, nothing in this world remains static. And this is especially so in the context of electronic commerce and consumer protection. We're in a dynamic environment where the only constant that we're facing is change. So now we're going to turn our attention to a few experts who are examining some of the challenges, the arising technologies, redress issues in the context of ODR, and especially with respect to redress mechanisms. We're first going to hear about the Singapore experience from Junyan, who is, as Andrea said, with the Singapore Mediation Center. So again, thank you for being here today, and really a remarkable group of people. So let's kick it off. Junyan, thank you so much.
Thank you, Betsy. So from Singapore's point of view, our ODR system development has not been moving, I suppose, as quickly as for many of the other countries that have shared amazing stories from the first panel. I think primarily it's because of our unique circumstances in Singapore. I think for many countries, ODR was driven by a need to overcome certain challenges in the consumer protection regime, one of which is, of course, cost, efficiency, and in many places, just the sheer geographical constraints of trying to get to a particular place, a very large land mass with remote communities. How do you ensure that they have access to justice all the way wherever they are found? And that's not the experience of Singapore at all. For our friends from the ASEAN region, greetings. Good morning to all of you. You know how small and tiny Singapore is, but for the rest of our friends from the rest of Asia Pacific, just to give you a sense of how tiny Singapore is, you could fit 10 Singapores into the island of Hawaii and still have room to move. So that's really how tiny we are. And so therefore, there was never any impetus to try to build an ODR system, since you could literally get to any part of Singapore within half an hour or an hour. And also our judicial system, we've been blessed with a fairly efficient judicial system. So again, redress has been forthcoming for many consumer areas. And so because of that, we've lagged behind. There's been no real push to develop ODR. But that has changed in recent times. I think because there is a recognition that, first of all, even your judicial system has limits, resourcing limits, and simply, you just don't have the understanding and expertise that can spread so thin across increasingly specialized areas of disputes. And as well, Singapore being a very small country, we're extremely heavily reliant on international trade and commerce and tourism. So again, creates another question. Are your existing judicial systems and local-based bodies equipped, competent, or even the right authorities to address cross-border disputes? And we see that a lot for consumer disputes. Let's say a tourist comes to Singapore, buys a camera, returns to his home country, and it doesn't work within a week. For today's system, you practically have no redress for such an issue. But I think there is an increasing sense that that's going to create a lot of problems on the ground for the trust between nations and the tourist industry and so on, and even e-commerce. So somebody's got to look at this. And the e-commerce experience is a little bit different from what we are looking at, because I love the example earlier where I think it was Enrico shared about DH Gates. Now that's not too different from an experience from, say, Amazon or eBay, where you're really using a platform to connect with your customers. And therefore, you are, as a seller, bound by the terms of the platform, which makes it easy for you to impose conditions. You can suspend their account, you can revoke certain kinds of trading rights and so on. So the compliance is already sort of built into the process because they need your platform, they want your platform, and they have to abide by whatever conditions you set. The question that we have to face is, if you move away from such a platform, what happens if parties are not bound by your whatever product you're offering or whatever platform you're offering? How do you ensure that they comply? And unfortunately, the answer usually goes back to laws, regimes, and schemes with some kind of compulsive force behind it. And that's really the question that we are also looking at for our own ODR development, because in a cross-border context, you need more than just the technological platform, which we are building here at SMC. But just a platform alone doesn't really do enough if the people that you're looking to use the platform, the disputants, a consumer and an organization that sells products or services to that consumer, if they don't need your platform, if they don't use your platform for anything, then why would they even care about your platform as a dispute resolution space? If there's any sort of decision that comes out of it, why would they comply? So that's where we realize that whatever we build from a technological point of view has to be married with some kind of enforcement regime that is put in place by the economies and the jurisdictions that are part of this whole ODR market that we are looking at. So a good start for us will be our own backyard, which is Singapore, and our immediate neighbors, which is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And I see many of our friends from there, the Philippines, Indonesia, and so on. So there is a move to discuss at ASEAN, that's the term for the association, ASEAN level, to see whether there can be a consumer protection sort of framework that is put in at intergovernmental level, which will then be translated into, in local laws and regimes that will put in place whatever is agreed at the treaty level, so that individual countries will then put in place a particular organization that will be responsible for collating the consumer complaints from their own country and then routing it to the counterpart organization in another country for follow-up. Now, that's the theoretical framework. That is the intergovernment structure that can be settled by all our agreements. But on the ground, who's going to do the work? That's always the second part of the problem. Compliance is one of the issues, but resourcing is the other. And again, as Colin rightly pointed out, who's going to pay for this? Is it going to be the private sector? Is it going to be the public sector? And the resourcing question is intimately intertwined with the question of how much is it going to cost. The lower the bill, the more people can afford to pay for it. The higher the bill, it necessarily limits whoever can underwrite the cost of it. So from SMC's point of view, we are trying to tackle the problem from a cost point of view. I think for many countries, when you put in place your ODR platforms, there is already a certain understanding that this is going to be underwritten by the government. There will be a certain amount of public funds that will be involved in the project. The question that SMC is trying to answer is, if we don't have any government funding, if we don't make use of public funding, could we build a sustainable model? Can we do something that the private sector and the disputants would pay for because the service that they feel they're getting exceeds the cost that we are charging them? And that's a very important question that must be answered. And for us, the only solution to this is by building a technological solution that reduces the amount of work that is done by people, because that's really, in most cases, the largest cost element of most of these kinds of services. The person in the middle who's receiving the complaint, who's doing the triage, trying to figure out, is this a valid complaint that we handle, or should this be routed to some other agency? Is there a criminal sort of matter that's disclosed and it should be reported to the police instead? So that the whole triage process, someone's got to do that. What about onboarding? When you want to get the information from the parties, if you need to solicit for contact details of the other side and so on, the onboarding process? How about contacting the other side? Who's going to reach out to them to inform them that the dispute has been started? And then after that, when you actually want to find a time for them to connect, to talk, I think today's post or almost post-COVID world, I think people are coming to accept that we don't necessarily need to meet face-to-face for our meetings. So the idea that people can meet online really helps a lot. It's just a case of finding a time, not necessarily a place anymore. But even then, when you want to, let's say, bring a mediator into the equation to listen to the dispute and mediate, or you want to bring an adjudicator to listen to the arguments of both sides and to render a decision, a binding judgment of a sort, how do you set up that time? You know, who's going to talk to each other's PAs and secretaries and find out their calendar. So all of that is work. All of that drives up cost. And when you have a consumer dispute, you can't charge a lot of fees. Nobody would pay a large sum of money to resolve a small dispute. So a lot of countries struggle with having a consumer protection system because the sheer amount of work required, even for a small, tiny case, outweighs the amount that you could probably charge. And then it becomes a government-funded process again. So for it to be commercially sustainable, we have to find a way to automate as much of these processes as possible, that from end to end, you don't need a person doing any of this. The system will automatically identify whether this is a correct case, whether it should be routed to some other place. It will collect all the necessary information from the parties. It will inform them of their rights and help them understand what the platform will and can do for them. It will route the complaint to the relevant other party, and it will invite them to come on board the platform and to join a conversation there. It will look for scheduling that will make sense for everybody, and it will also involve a neutral at the appropriate stage. In SMC's case, we are not trying to automate the neutral yet. I think we are a little bit far off from the point where you can have an AI-driven mediator or an AI-driven adjudicator, although there are already algorithms and systems that can approximate some of that work, by sort of giving you prompted suggestions in your negotiation based on statistical trends of people who were in similar situations and so on. So there's already algorithms that approximate this, but I don't think we're anywhere close to having a true AI-driven neutral. And I don't think we want that for the time being, because I think people still trust in people, that sense that there's a human being listening to my problem rather than just a cold, set of transistors. That's, I think, to stay for the moment. So actually our problem is a lot simpler than it looks. We really need to just automate a lot of the manual processes rather than try to automate the thinking behind it. But who knows? Because the aim would be, as I think Colin was the one who mentioned earlier, once you have a system that runs for long enough with a large number of cases, you have a rich body of data that you can then mine, from which you can then build machine learning processes so that you can even have rudimentary algorithms that sort of support the process and eliminate the disputes, so that at the end, even if you still have a human mediator, if you still have a human adjudicator, the number of disputes that actually reach that level is minimized, and the vast majority are dealt with earlier. Yeah. So that's really.
My apologies.
Yeah, sorry, Betsy, you were saying something.
No, continue. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So for us, I think that's the direction that we are going in for the short term, which is to build an automated system to try to reduce the cost of administering disputes, so that we do not need to rely on a regular source of funding, whether it's the government or so on, but it can be actually borne by the parties that use the system, the businesses and the consumers. And I think Colin's point is correct, that consumers who feel that they've paid money for a service and don't get the service will not be happy if they have to pay a single dollar more to resolve a dispute. But I do think that holds more true if the person asking for the dollar is the very party that they paid money to. So if you bought something from Amazon and they ask you for $1 more to resolve the dispute you have with them, then they might be upset. But I think most people will accept that if it's a neutral, unrelated party, and there's a tiny fee involved, I think they're more amenable to that. And that's a business model that we are exploring, where the parties will pay a tiny fee. Sometimes the fee is not even just for sustainability purposes, but it's really to keep out the trolls and the spam. To put a little pain point up front so that people don't try their luck, because it looks vaguely useful to them, but it's not really meant for them, and they just try anyway because there's no cost. So sometimes you want to just put a little bit of a gateway there, maybe $1 just to even get past the first screen, which is refundable if it's a genuine case, for example. So something like that. But the aim would be then the companies and the businesses who benefit from a service that helps them to maintain their brand and to deal with unhappy consumers, they will pay a larger share of this. By the end, the overall price tag must be manageable so that it's palatable for everyone. So I think that's really a quick update of where Singapore is in this development. Back to you, Betsy.
Thank you so much. And Colin just used an American expression that by forcing someone to pay a little money up front, they have some incentive to be involved. It requires a commitment. It's not just to filter out the spam and the bots, but to say, if you spend $1 for it, you have some more commitment to the outcome. Skin in the game. I think is that football? I don't know. But as this panel is talking about, our first panel was talking about existing systems. And this panel is exploring the frontiers ahead and how you build a system in Singapore, in India, in Australia, how you build it out. So I think we're going to hear next from Vivi, who's been doing some really fascinating work in her research on ODR and consumer protection, and how technology is intertwined. So it's the perfect segue from our discussion about Singapore. So Vivi, thank you so much for being with us, and looking forward to hearing your remarks.
Thank you, Betsy. It's my pleasure. I will be sharing some PowerPoint slides. So if you can bear with me for a second. Okay. Second, excellent. Okay, so good morning or evening, depending on where you are. And thank you again for the opportunity for me to share a little bit about what is relevant to my research, but also what is currently happening in Australia. And sadly, similar to Singapore, there's also, I think, a little bit of a lag here in Australia in terms of integration of a comprehensive online dispute resolution system, especially in the context of consumer disputes. So my name is Vivi Tan, and I am a law academic at Melbourne University Law School, and I teach contract law and consumer law, and I am currently undertaking my PhD on consumer online dispute resolution in the Australian context. What I'm interested in is to analyze the elements that are required for the development and implementation of an effective ODR system, especially in the consumer context. In particular, how we balance competing considerations or objectives, such as the ones that you've heard from Jun-An earlier on, when designing such system, and the kinds of values that we want to protect within such system, whether or not it's a privately led mechanism or a business-led mechanism, or whether when it is actually integrated into the public judiciary system. And while ODR holds vast potential for increasing consumer access to justice, I argue that we need to be very mindful of the dispute system design, so that we can ensure that the online dispute resolution system can fulfill its goals or intended objectives, that it can provide a high quality alternative to the courts, and that it can also maintain its legitimacy amongst its users. As such, I have argued for a critical analysis of 3 design aspects of such system, including the system design, the process design, and the governance design. And so today I'll be speaking to you about some of the relevant design considerations for each of these design aspects. But before I talk about this, I would really like to begin by clearly specifying the different types of ODR mechanisms. And I think it's important because sometimes there is lack of clarity when someone refers to ODR. Sometimes the question needs to be asked, is the ODR a sui generis system, or is it a system that automates ADR mechanisms, for example, also known as OADR? And so I think there needs to be a little bit of clarity in relation to this so that we can have a full understanding of the different types of the ODR system, but also the potential of each of these systems. So in some of my earlier works, I've talked about how ODR systems can be distinguished based on how automated it is, or based on its functionality. And you can have at the one end of the spectrum what is known as the first generation ODR system, which really only substitutes or use technology to substitute for offline dispute resolution processes. And then some examples we've heard earlier on today about some of the systems that, for example, utilizes online conciliation, such as in Mexico in terms of Profeco. And usually the central feature of these types of ODR system is the involvement of human beings and human intelligence in the planning, the managing, and the decision-making processes itself. Somewhere in the middle of the spectrum is what I called a hybrid ODR system, which utilizes both online alternative dispute resolution principles, as well as some level of automation. So for example, blind bidding is a form of automated negotiation, which can utilize both online mediation as well as automated software. Another example includes an ODR system which uses a tiered dispute resolution system to enable end-to-end resolution of disputes, such as the Civil Resolution Tribunal in British Columbia, whereby there is some use of simple rules-based artificial intelligence, such as expert system, especially at the very beginning of the dispute resolution process. And on the other end of the automation spectrum, what Junen was also saying earlier, a system that is really ideal and probably will be designed sometimes in the not too distant future, which is a system that is fully autonomous, which can not only offer problem diagnosis and resolution capabilities using algorithms, but it may also have other functionalities such as legal data analytics, which is what we've been talking quite a lot about today, the ability to predict the outcomes of certain decisions, and the significant feature of these more advanced, I guess, automated technology is the replacement, or I should say the substitution of the human element, because essentially we're using machine learning technology to recommend decisions which are not explicitly programmed by a human. Now, obviously, the use of such technologies could have a major impact in our justice system, but at the moment, maybe Colin can answer this later on, but I'm not sure if there is, for example, a publicly instituted system that is capable of doing this particular process. Okay, so now that we have a little bit of clarity in terms of the different types of ODR systems, I'd like to then talk about what I mentioned earlier in terms of some of the considerations that we need to take into account when designing the system, the process, and the governance behind an ODR consumer system. So starting with system design, in the context of consumer disputes, system designers must consider a number of factors. Firstly, the unique characteristics of consumer disputes. They're often characterized by their low value, the consumer's desire to obtain a redress in the most simple and straightforward manner, as well as the inequality of bargaining power and information asymmetry between the consumer and the businesses. So I argue that these important characteristics cannot be ignored. And in fact, they must be considered when you're determining, for example, the objectives of the ODR system. the types of dispute resolution processes that you want to adopt, the extent of technological integration, the kind of justice and outcomes that you want the system to produce, as well as the overarching values that you want to protect in this very system. And in addition to being sensitive to these characteristics, it is also important that the system can respond to some of the real tension between, on the one hand, the enforcement of consumer substantive rights, which are found in the legislation or in the constitution, and on the other hand, this design of dispute resolution process that can be relevant when resolving such disputes. So for example, in regard to most ODR systems which are currently in place for consumers, a lot of these systems use offline ADR processes and substitute them to become online ADR processes. So essentially, are we trying to foster agreements and encourage settlements between the parties? Are we using facilitative techniques to try and repair relationships? Or should we be focusing more on the enforcement of the law, on the provision of neutral objective determination by an adjudicator? So there could be this tension between, on the one hand, keeping it all private between the parties, and on the other hand, having that public enforcement element to it as well. Secondly, I think objectives that often relate to the improvement in efficiency can also often be in competition with other consumer law objectives relating to addressing systematic issues in the market and or deterrence, which really can only be done if a particular matter, for example, is publicly adjudicated. And so the failure to acknowledge and to respond to these types of tensions or competing consumer law objectives has the potential to undermine the effectiveness of an ODR system. And moreover, it can also compound some of the existing barriers to consumer redress. Moving on, in relation to process and governance design, this is also very important because obviously we want to try and protect certain values within the system, especially values that are relevant to the administration of justice. So values like equal accessibility to the platform. We must be careful to avoid marginalization of users because of their lack of digital fluency, because they're self-represented, because of their geographical location, or perhaps because of disabilities. Secondly, we must also improve access to justice, but we must design the system to encourage appropriate outcomes, fair outcomes for the consumers. And so, for example, we may have to provide sufficient triage to assess whether any solution as presented by the platform is indeed the appropriate solution, or whether further referral or investigation is needed. Where required, we must provide parties with support and help to fully understand the difficult legal or business concepts or to have their documents reviewed prior to submission. So essentially ensuring that there is some sort of equal bargaining power when it comes to the resolution of the disputes, especially taking into account that unique characteristic in consumer transactions that involves unequal bargaining and litigating power. And finally, in relation to transparency and accountability, I think that the more automated the ODR system is, the higher the level of trust that is required from its users, and the more transparent it should be. So the system must be accountable. Any potential lack of transparency and biases associated with algorithms must be disclosed and must be made transparent, because otherwise it can give rise to a lack of trust in the platform. And so I guess in summary, pardon me, it is very important that we think about all the design aspects, including the system design, the process design, and the governance design. The reason is that I think often when we talk about ODR, we think about the obvious improvements in efficiency and timeliness, but we don't often think about the more qualitative elements that may not have tangible economic value or easily defined metric, such as the type of justice that you are getting from the system. And so I think, indeed, ensuring the integrity of an ODR system is therefore a very urgent issue now that we are seeing more and more of online dispute resolution system, both in the public and private sphere. And although at this stage it is possible to design a comprehensive publicly integrated end-to-end ODR system, such as the British Columbia Civil Resolution Tribunal. And while this is ideal, it may not always be possible to be realized because of resources issues or other barriers, such as in terms of cross-border, lack of harmonization in consumer laws, and or difficulty in reaching and enforcing multilateral agreements. And so perhaps, although this is sort of the ideal solution, perhaps we should be thinking more along the lines of what Jun En was proposing and focusing more on discrete, more focused interventions in this area. So for example, instead of introducing an end-to-end system, perhaps we can simply introduce the first tier, which is the triage or the exploration tool. And this can be very useful in terms of increasing consumers' awareness of their substantive legal rights, empowering them to present their matter, and hopefully helping them to resolve their disputes as early as possible without costly legal representation. And I think this is a good catalyst, so the implementation of such a system can be a good catalyst for further iteration or additional features in the ODR system, as soon as more data is for example, collected. And so finally, I think also through this type of discrete and much more focused intervention, there can be further cooperation between public bodies and private entities, such as the companies and the traders themselves. And there can be that synergy between, on the one hand, private internal resolution of disputes, which are business-led, and on the other hand, publicly instituted efforts to mitigate some of the existing problems, such as lack of information and unequal bargaining power. So it might be that the public institution or the public consumer bodies themselves don't even have to actually integrate an end-to-end ODR system. What they can do is they can put in efforts that can complement or provide some sort of supervision of what is already currently available privately through the businesses led mechanisms. And on that note, I'm finished with my presentation. Thank you.
Well, we could not have designed this any better, the way that the dialogue has proceeded. First, learning about, as envisioning in Singapore, the development of technology and leveraging technology to the extent possible. And Vivi, what you've also contributed in looking at the more qualitative elements of ODR is that trust is maybe promoted through the technology rather than having the human interface that may have some subjectivity and biases that lead to certain outcomes, and how you best find the right measure to between the technology and the decision making, so that it is a system that has the confidence and the trust of the public, both for the business side and the consumer side. And so now we're going to turn to Srikara Prasad, who is with Devara Research in India, which is aiming to empower consumers in the financial sector, but I think looking more broadly about how ODR can promote financial security and well-being in the population. So grateful to have you with us today, Srikara, and continue the dialogue. This is just great.
Thank you so much, Betsy. It's a pleasure to be here. And I just want to check if I am audible. Yeah, thanks. So yeah, I think I want to start by saying that what Junyan and Vivi have spoken about kind of perfectly sets up what I wanted to talk about when it came to ODR and financial services. So as you can see, just coming from, to tell you where we come from, at Dwara Research, we're a not-for-profit think tank whose main objective is to maximize financial access and usage among low-income households in India. And I think one of the core points that come up over there when we're talking about maximizing financial access is to make sure that financial access is safe. And that naturally translates to having robust and effective redress mechanisms for consumers to access. And considering we primarily work for the benefit of low-income households, we look for cost-effective, accessible redress forums as well. And that was really our entry point into online dispute resolution. So to start off, I do want to note vital contributions from my colleagues, Beni, Chuk, Malvika Raghavan, and Chinmay. And a lot of the content you will see in the slide is actually a team effort, although I'm just presenting it here. So I think the conversation that I will steer right now, I will be taking you over 4 broad areas. So first is just to paint a very broad picture of what redress is like in India right now, and especially in the financial sector. And then go on to show what the potential for ODR in the financial sector is. And then come down to more broadly what the developments are, and finally what are the challenges you can expect when designing and deploying ODR in an economy that is similar to India. I think one of the participants had earlier asked about what do you do when you have disparate redress institutions, and how can you use ODR to kind of integrate them. And I think some of the issues that come about because of that disparate system would really pronounced in this presentation of mine. So to kick off, redress in the financial sector, just to give you a broad context, the first question I asked myself when I had to start designing this is, why is India's experience relevant for APEC? And I think the 5 things that I could come down to is that India is a very vast economy, and it's kind of divided into 29 states and 7 union territories. And each of the states have their own jurisdiction. They have territorial jurisdiction over the issues that come out. And that kind of draws boundaries over where consumers can seek redress when they have an issue. The legal system itself, we do have a traditional dispute resolution system through the courts, but we also have a pretty established alternative dispute resolution system, which is backed by law, which also allows electronic and online dispute resolution procedures. But then the problem is also, because of the size and because of territorial jurisdictions, what India has kind of done to facilitate redress is it has created multiple redress forums, which kind of overlap in jurisdiction. And what that has done is it has created a very complex, a very burdensome redress environment for consumers to navigate. And unfortunately, by doing that, the country has not really ensured that there is adequate capacity to deal with all the complaints that come through. So to just dive into detail on some of these points, when I say that India's redress system is fragmented, you can see in this image here that there are 4 broad areas, 4 broad fields in which consumers can kind of seek redress. So first you go to providers, and this is specifically in the financial sector. So if a consumer has a financial grievance, they are first expected to identify the financial service provider and seek grievance there, and then escalate to a financial sector ombudsman. And then alternatively, they can approach a consumer forum if they think there's a consumer protection violation. And then they always have a redress to the civil court as well. Now, the problem here is that it's great that there are specialized redress forums for each of the sectors. But the problem is that for a consumer will barely be able to see the differences between each sector, each product. Those nuances would easily escape the consumer, and expecting the consumer to keep in mind what the difference between, say, a pension product or a loan product or a payments product is, can be really unfair. And that's where the redress system kind of first breaks down. Despite its focus on providing targeted redress, I think this is creating a pretty complex environment for redress. Second is within each of these redress systems as well, you can see that procedures, the requirements that it has from consumers are extremely burdensome. So for instance, one of the simplest examples that I can give you here is that consumers are expected to submit written documents when they have to complain, and also procure evidence. And I think this automatically kind of creates a barrier for people with limited literacy who might not be able to do this. And lastly, just on the point of inadequacy, I think the most glaring example is that I'm using a technical term here when I say NBFCs, but just to expand on that, these are non-banking financial companies that cater primarily to providing loans and credit financing to very specific communities. So you can say low-income communities, microfinance institutions, etc. So they play a very crucial role in dispersing credit and ensuring equal access to credit. But at the same time, in a country as large as India, and with the amount of money, crores of money that NBFCs do disperse, there are only 4 ombudsmen to oversee all the disputes, and that's grossly inadequate. So I'll just quickly go to an example about what I mean when I say that redress is very complicated and kind of broken. This is an example of the number of complaints that were rejected by the banking ombudsman in 2019-20. Before I dive into each of these points, I think what I do want to call out is that this is the proportion of complaints that have even reached the banking ombudsman. There is a vast proportion of the population that does not make complaints to any formal redress mechanism in the first place. But even among those complaints that were made to the ombudsman, close to 75, I think it's 55% of all those complaints were kind of rejected. So more than half of them were rejected. And the primary causes, the primary reasons for rejections are, one, that it's not represented properly, meaning that the complaint was not made in the manner prescribed by procedure. Second, that it was outside territorial jurisdiction, essentially that a consumer did not go to the forum with the right, in the right state or jurisdiction. And the third biggest one is that it's a first resort complaint, which essentially means that a consumer who had a grievance went directly to the second level of redress as opposed to the first one, or went to the ombudsman before going to the service provider themselves. Now, these might seem like very straightforward reasons, but I think we need to contextualize this within how consumers perceive the financial sector, especially now with increasing digitization, increasing modularization in financial services. So for a very basic example is, if I make a payment to someone else, for me as a consumer, I see that my bank is involved because my account is being debited, and the payee's bank is involved because it's getting credited. But in between, I would not be able to understand that there are payment service providers, that they would be a payment entity that kind of collects money and then disperses it. And I would not know why, if a payment fails, I would not know why that payment has failed, and who exactly I should talk to for redress. So I can't identify the financial entity, one, and even if I do, I won't be able to identify who what the right redress forum is. So in this confusing environment, it's kind of difficult to expect a consumer to know all the rules for admitting a complaint, to know what the right procedure is, what the right jurisdiction is, and who to go to in the first resort. So so in that context, I think just to dive deeper into all the list of issues, this is a slightly text heavy slide. But I think just to give a run through of all the issues that from a consumer point of view, what is making the redress system less effective for me is first, there's a high tendency of disputes. So if I go to a grievance redress forum and I lodge a complaint, I don't know when I can expect that complaint to close. So the first 2 points is about pendency and high turnaround time. The insurance ombudsman, which hears all the complaints about insurance disputes in India with consumers, I think the latest reports show about 22% of those cases, or close to around 12,000 cases, have been pending for more than a year. Even in terms of turnaround times, we can expect some cases, actually a lot of cases, to go on for between 4 months and 1 year. Now, we have spoken before about how this can be a very long time when it comes to consumer disputes, but I think the stakes are a lot higher, a lot riskier when it comes to finance, because it involves hard-earned money. It involves, I mean, especially for low-income consumers, it makes a great deal if their money is getting lost, or if it's in dispute for so long. And that just adds to the cost that they bear for seeking redress. The third point is inaccessibility of redress forums. Most of the ombudsmen do have an online presence as well. They have websites where consumers can lodge grievances, but because of, say, lacking information, ICT infrastructure, because of poor internet connectivity, the online forums are also kind of distant. They're not accessible for consumers. And physically, most of the redress forums are located in urban areas. And if you look at India on a map, you would see that the urban centers are far and few from the majority of the country, which is remote and rural. So that automatically raises very high geographical bars for redress. The fourth one, as I was pointing out in the earlier slide as well, there are very high rejection rates based on technicalities that can be avoided if the rules are made more consumer-centric, and if they're seen at from a consumer point of view. The fourth one is low grievance redress capacity, where grievance redress forums don't really have enough capacity to deal with all the complaints that come in, even though those are probably a portion of all the complaints that might come in if more people were involved in the process. And lastly, the system itself is very opaque. So consumers might not really know how to file their complaints and who to file a complaint against. So these were the main issues that we recognized in redress in the financial sector, and this was applicable for other areas as well, other kinds of consumer disputes as well. So when we looked at how ODR could fit here, we conceptualized something similar to what Junian and Vivi had spoken about as kind of a support for ODR as a support mechanism for consumers, as opposed to something that only helps them resolve complaints. So so we thought, I'm not going to go into all of these in detail. I think they're pretty self-explanatory at this point, but we did think that considering ODR is a technology link almost to support consumers, you could use it for improving accessibility that over and above, basically reduce the amount of cost that consumers incur, the geographic barriers that they face, or even cognitive barriers that they face. When I say cognitive, I also include barriers like linguistic barriers. I think that might be something that is very relevant to cross-border trade as well. Within India, I think there are tons of languages. I can't put a number on it. And usually redress happens in English or Hindi, and it might be inaccessible to people who probably speak Telugu, Tamil, Bengali, whatever. So there are all of these barriers that come up, and ODR, with its potential for synchronous communication, asynchronous communication, basically leverage technology to make redress more accessible, simplify grievance redress, reduce the turnaround times, increase trust in, by increased trust, I mean increase trust in the financial services by assuring consumers that if they do have a complaint, it will be redressed quickly. And lastly, to increase transparency in the entire redress process. What we So what we did after identifying these opportunities is we did a public search of what kind of ODR systems are really out there. And we did this exercise sometime in August last year. And after listening to Juliana and everybody else speak today, I do think we missed out on some very good examples of ODR being used exactly to do the things that we thought ODR can do. So I think if we had to materialize the opportunities for ODR that I presented in the previous slide, the 4 big things that ODR can do in financial services especially is first consulting and handholding, and that would mean assist the consumers with procedures, documentation, evidence gathering, decision making. And this is exactly like what Junian and Vivi had spoken about earlier. We also think that ODR can play a great role in facilitating communication. So currently, as someone who's personally had this experience, communication from my bank, for instance, if I face an issue, is extremely technical and hard to grasp. It's also very esoteric. You really want to understand what the status of your complaint is or what you're expected to do. But ODR systems would kind of help simplify that, either automatically or maybe with the help of another person in between to simplify communication. The third one is escalation. And this, I think, is I think this is where I kind of have a slight crossroads with Junian and Vivi Dan, where they say that at this point, it might be better to limit ourselves to the assisting consumer space. But I do think ODR can play a great role in integrating, in not only providing mediation, negotiation, conciliation online, but also integrating appellatory systems. So if I don't have proper redress at the first level, I think ODR should also help me automatically escalate to another level and essentially integrate the entire redress system for easy movement of complaints. And lastly, so I kind of mix streamlining and escalation, but essentially create an integrated redress system where even though you have different kinds of redress institutions, you can expect free and easy flow of complaints between redress forums without burdening the consumer separately. I think in 2013, India had constituted a committee to kind of review redress in India. It's called the Financial Sector Legislative Reform Commission. And the body that they proposed was called the Financial Redress Agency. And that was supposed to be one unified front-end redress agency that would collect all the complaints and then triage it to appropriate bodies depending on how they analyze the complaint. So the burden was really not on the consumer to identify the right forum, but it was now on a central institution to kind of make sure the complaint reaches the right forum for resolution. Back then, I think it was deemed to be demanding of a lot of technical resources, but now considering the developments we have had in information and communication technology, a system like that would actually come into reality. So that's as far as the theory of what we thought could happen. I think currently the developments in India, they're not as many as we'd like. I do think this experience we've seen from Mexico, Brazil, and Peru are far ahead compared to where India is. But I think the key headlines here are, I think in August 2020, the Reserve Bank of India, which is India's central bank, they came out with guidelines to develop ODR systems in digital payments. And those guidelines are awfully similar to what I just spoke to you about a few moments ago, and also to what Junian and Vivi had spoken about. So I do think the Reserve Bank of India, at least, is thinking of a comprehensive ODR system in that front. The Department of Consumer Affairs had come out with a digital grievance redress mechanism, but I do think that is more of a portal where you can file your complaints and track it, but it's not like ConciliaNet. So there is a lot of distance to go. The Ministry for MSMEs had come out with a portal where this was specifically for MSMEs to kind of settle payments dues with the government. So it serves a very, very niche, very specific purpose. But that's the development in the MSME space. The judiciary has been very proactive with digitizing court hearings. So they have come out with new versions for their e-courts project for easier hearings online. And lastly, I think this is the biggest development, which is that the Niti Aayog, which is the central government's policy think tank, they have come out with a broad policy plan for designing ODR systems in India. So a lot of the discussion that we're having here is also something that's been reflected in that document, that about how do you kind of build ODR systems for India. And lastly, I'm going to come to kind of the challenges that we can see for building ODR, not only in the financial sector, but more generally in a context like India's. So we see kind of 5 major challenges. The first one and the most prominent one, I think, being digital divide. So when we say digital divide, we usually mean the differences in access to information and communication technology and infrastructure. But I do think there is a great role for digital literacy to play here as well. In India, I think a majority of the people still use feature phones, which is your non-smartphones. And there's a major disparity in internet access as well. So I think while tele density is about 130%, that's 130 telephonic connections per 100 people in urban areas, that number drastically falls to 59 in rural areas. So there is a big digital divide, which will have to be plugged in terms of how people access ODR systems, how people use ODR systems, and whether the ODR systems themselves are designed to kind of fit that context. The second big challenge is trust in the ODR system. And this is not just for consumers, but also for providers. Do they really trust ODR systems to provide the kind of redress they are expecting to provide, to solve disputes in a manner that they are expecting ODR to resolve them? And would they be enforceable? Would they have the same power of would they have the same backing of the law? I think these are all questions that would kind of affect the uptake of ODR in India. The third one is cultural challenges. What I mean here is not social attitudes that might, I don't mean social barriers that might stop people from using ODR, but I'm referring to how litigious are consumers really, if I can use that word. In India, you see that a lot of consumers choose to not go to a redress forum because they think it will involve high costs, high amount of time, and they won't be a major point in doing so. Now, if ODR has to take off, I think one challenge it would have to solve is to kind of undo that perception that seeking redress is a bad idea. And that would be a major perception challenge that it would have to fight. There are some studies that kind of show that when consumers do face grievances in finance, especially when it comes to conduct of service providers, they tend to internalize them as opposed to seek redress. So that's just one example of the challenges that ODR will have to tackle. And I think the fourth and fifth points actually have both been addressed sufficiently by both my co-panelists about the capacity to build and operate ODR systems. How do providers ensure they are financially and commercially sustainable, and what are the different kind of rules and regulations that you would need to run ODR systems smoothly? And that's my time. Oh, sorry. I just wanted to end with some kind of takeaways, which I think Vivi did brilliantly in her slides. But when you are thinking of designing and implementing ODR, I think the few points that you have to consider is that you need to ensure that ODR is accessible and affordable for your consumers, that the systems must match the reality of ODR, of the consumers' lived experiences. Essentially, you can't design a high-tech solution for a low-tech environment. You need to ensure inclusiveness in design, and that means you need to account for all the barriers that consumers face, social, linguistic, etc., for designing ODR systems. You need to make sure that your ODR system is really solving a need that the consumer has. As Junian was saying, consumers won't use anything if they don't see a relevance in it. So that's one bit. You need to ensure safety and protection, create trust. I think one of the panelists in the morning had a brilliant slide on how you could do this with trust marks and all those measures. And yeah, you need a sustainable approach to building ODR systems and having appropriate rules and regulations. Yeah, that's my name.
That was wonderful. We have three really big thinkers, which I think is so exciting to listen to. One of the points that has not come up in our discussion yet today, but did come up in one of our pre-meeting calls, was the issue of interoperability. And we're talking about cross-border transactions. So the three of you who are looking at developing, designing platforms, I wonder the extent to which you consider the issue of interoperability in your design vision. Maybe I'll start with Vivi because I'm talking about design and that was a really big area for you, or whether you just focus kind of domestically on what's necessary for dealing with your economy as the first step. I mean, but it seems to me that if interoperability is not a fundamental building block, you're never going to be able to make it part of a larger system. And since part of our discussion today and tomorrow is going to be about cross-border trade, you would think interoperability would be an essential feature. So Vivi, do you have thoughts on that?
Yes. So I think the beauty, for lack of a better word, the beauty of the dispute system design framework that I have shared, where you have to first look at the system design before you even think about the process and the governance, is that you're forced to look at the existing redress ecosystem. So now, whether you do it domestically, where you look at, and some of the questions that I've posted, where you look at the existing domestic consumer redress systems, or if you're thinking about a cross-border ODR system, then you have to do the same exercise and consider what are currently available in the different countries that the system is going to somehow be put to use, and then work out whether, for example, the ODR system simply needs to augment those existing systems that already exist, or whether it can be an alternative, and in what way it can be used as an alternative system. And so by doing this, the issue of interoperability comes to the fore, because if, for example, there are already other online dispute resolution systems existing in some of the other economies or jurisdictions, then how will this central ODR cross-border system work with those other existing systems? So I think that's why it's important that whoever the designer of this cross-border system must do is to look at the existing ecosystem and the existing redress mechanisms that are available, and then determine, do we need to augment these existing systems, or do we perhaps need to introduce something completely new and different, and how will that then relate and operate together with the existing systems?
And actually, I'm going to call out Brazil now, because as I understand it, Consumidor.gov actually is now speaking with neighboring countries to make this a standard platform that can be used by other countries. So Enrique, are you still with us? I guess I should have looked for that first.
It's getting a little late for Enrique, so
yeah, understand.
He might have gone to sleep. But I also wanted to emphasize what Junyan said about the ASEAN countries. And I think Singapore, I mean, one of the hallmarks of Singapore is that it's so cooperative because it's so connected to so many other countries. So I think thinking about these things in a cross-jurisdictional way, in some respects, is a smarter investment of time and energy. And some of these design questions, I mean, the thing about India is it's such a massive country with so many people. It's almost like you're dealing with 10 different countries within one country. Whereas Singapore, for its system to matter and deliver value, it's got to work across multiple different partner countries. So I think it's a fascinating conversation. It really is about interoperability.
Well, there's a lot of fan mail coming up in the chat. So I think the three of you are going to be hearing from a lot of other folks as well. I actually now I'm going to put someone else on the line because I know that a lot of this discussion is also happening in the Philippines, where they are exploring ways of developing and implementing ODR. And I wonder if any of our colleagues from the Philippines, because again, there you have an issue of several languages and literacy issues and access issues, and don't feel obligated to chime in, but if you have anything to contribute to this conversation, we would love to hear from you.
That is a pretty rough cold call.
I know, wasn't that mean of me? Okay.
That's cold. They don't have anything prepared.
I apologize. Gina is having like a good laugh at my expense.
Potentially tomorrow too. But I mean, I just wanted to say this was such a fantastic session today. We've made so much progress from the beginning with Pablo's presentation through the presentations about Latin America into this panel. I'm just incredibly enthralled by how many bases we've covered. And I'm reluctant for the session to end, but I know it must at some point, especially as people get to midnight, 1 a.m. But I've taken very, very thick notes, and we have all of the presentations from all of our panelists. And I think we're going to be able to roll a lot of these topics right into the conversations tomorrow. So thank you so much to all of our panelists in all the sessions, but in particular for the latter session here today. I think that there's so much good grist for the mill for us as we think through what some of the best practices and takeaways will be. And if I was working in consumer protection in a country that has not yet developed our ODR strategy, I would find this session to be incredibly valuable.
So Andrea, do you have any closing words for this morning? Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy. Well, thank you very much to our panelists for this enriching discussion. Betsy and Colin said definitely we could keep hours talking about this important topic. And thank you.
Good. So we will see you all tomorrow at the same time. We will begin and look forward to more spirited discussions. So with many, many thanks to APEC and to Indocopi and to all of our really skilled, inspiring speakers. This has been so productive. Colin, thank you very much. And we'll see you all tomorrow in the same place.
Have a good night or have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. We will be sending a reminder for all of you.
Thank you, Andrea.
Email. Thank you.
Many thanks to all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. See you. Bye.
Thank you.